In the beginning, before the world knew order or form, there existed only the vast emptiness of cosmic chaos, a primordial void where neither light nor darkness held dominion. From this formless expanse, according to the most ancient Baltic traditions, preserved in Lithuanian sacred memory, emerged the first stirrings of divine consciousness. The earth lay barren and silent, the heavens remained unmarked by celestial bodies, and no voice had yet spoken to break the eternal silence that blanketed creation. It was from this primordial chaos that Perkūnas first manifested, not as a gradual emergence, but as a sudden, explosive awakening that shattered the cosmic stillness. His birth marked the first thunderclap that ever echoed across the universe, a sound so powerful that it caused the very foundations of reality to tremble and take shape. The ancient Baltic peoples understood this moment as the beginning of all ordered existence, when the raw forces of nature first found their divine embodiment in the mighty form of the Thunder God. The earliest cosmogonic traditions speak of Perkūnas arising as pure celestial fire, his essence composed of the very lightning that would become his eternal weapon. Unlike mortal beings who must learn to wield tools, Perkūnas was born already possessing absolute mastery over the atmospheric forces that would define his divine nature. His awakening sent ripples of electrical energy cascading through the void, each spark becoming a star, each bolt of lightning carving the pathways that would later guide the winds and storms across the newly forming world. This primordial thunder god did not emerge alone from the cosmic chaos. The Baltic understanding of divine hierarchy placed Perkūnas among the fundamental forces that shaped reality itself, yet his role was distinctly that of the active, dynamic principle that brought movement and change to the static void. Where other divine forces might represent stability or permanence, Perkūnas embodied the raw power of transformation, the violent beauty of storms that could both destroy and create in equal measure. The Thunder God's domain extended far beyond mere meteorological phenomena. Ancient Baltic peoples recognized Perkūnas as the divine force responsible for the very concept of atmospheric pressure, the invisible weight of air that presses down upon the earth and all its inhabitants. When Perkūnas stirred in the heavens, the air itself would respond, gathering into great masses of cloud and wind that announced his presence to those below. His breathing was said to create the pressure changes that preceded every storm, his heartbeat the rhythm that governed the timing of thunder following lightning. Within the Lithuanian pantheon, Perkūnas occupied a position of unrivaled supremacy among the active deities. While other gods might govern specific aspects of existence, fertility, death, wisdom, or craft, Perkūnas commanded the fundamental forces that made life itself possible. Without his lightning to split the darkness, without his rain to nourish the earth, without his winds to carry the seeds of plants across the land, the world would remain as barren and lifeless as the primordial void from which he emerged. The ancient Lithuanians understood that Perkūnas possessed not merely power over storms, but authority over the very concept of divine justice. His lightning strikes were never random acts of destruction, but precise manifestations of cosmic law. When his bolts descended from the heavens to strike a particular tree, building, or location, the people recognized this as divine judgment, being rendered with perfect accuracy. The thunder god's wrath was terrible to behold, yet it was always righteous, always proportionate to the offence that had provoked it. His control over atmospheric phenomena extended to every aspect of weather patterns that shaped Baltic life. Perkūnas could summon gentle spring rains that coaxed new growth from the soil, or unleash devastating hailstorms that could flatten entire forests in moments. The direction and intensity of winds responded to his will, carrying favourable weather to those who honoured him properly, or bringing destructive tempests to those who had earned his displeasure. Even the formation of clouds obeyed his commands, gathering and dispersing according to his divine intentions. The sacred etymology of Perkūnas reveals profound connections to the most ancient Indo-European religious traditions, linking the Baltic Thunder God to a primordial divine archetype that spans across numerous cultures and languages. The root of his name can be traced to the Proto-Indo-European word for oak tree and thunder, suggesting that from the very earliest times, human consciousness associated the power of storms with the strength and endurance of the mighty oak. This linguistic connection was not merely coincidental, but reflected a deep understanding of the natural world that recognized the oak as the earthly manifestation of celestial power. In Lithuanian, the name Perkūnas carries within it the sound of thunder itself, the rolling consonants and explosive vowels echoing the acoustic signature of his divine voice. Related forms appear throughout the Baltic language family, with Latvian Perkunas sharing the same essential meaning and phonetic structure. These names were not arbitrary labels applied to a distant deity, but sacred words that contained actual fragments of divine power, syllables that could invoke the thunder god's presence when spoken with proper reverence and understanding. The linguistic analysis reveals that Perkunas belongs to the same divine family as the Slavic Perun, the Germanic Thor, and the Vedic Indra, all thunder gods whose names derive from the same ancient Indo-European root. This connection suggests that the worship of Perkunas represents one of the oldest continuous religious traditions in human history, stretching back thousands of years to the common ancestors of the Indo-European peoples. The Baltic preservation of this ancient name in its most archaic form demonstrates the remarkable conservatism of Lithuanian religious tradition. Archaeological evidence supports the linguistic connections through the discovery of thunder god symbols and ritual objects that show clear stylistic relationships to similar artifacts found across the Indo-European world. The double-headed axe, the wheel symbol, and various lightning motifs appear in Baltic contexts, with the same meanings they carried in ancient Germanic, Slavic, and even Anatolian cultures. These shared symbols indicate that the worship of Perkunas was not an isolated development, but part of a vast religious complex that once unified much of prehistoric Europe. The earliest ritual recognition of Perkunas took place in sacred groves that were carefully selected for their natural power and beauty. These were not randomly chosen patches of forest, but locations where the divine presence could be most clearly felt and experienced. The ancient Lithuanians possessed sophisticated knowledge of landscape features that indicated divine favour, seeking out groves where lightning had struck without causing permanent damage, where unusual acoustic properties amplified the sound of thunder, or where rare atmospheric phenomena occurred with greater frequency than elsewhere. These sacred groves were typically situated on elevated ground that brought worshippers closer to the realm of the thunder god, while providing natural protection from the most dangerous aspects of his power. The trees within these groves were considered living temples, their branches serving as natural altars where offerings could be placed and rituals performed. The rustling of leaves in the wind was interpreted as Perkunas speaking directly to his followers, while the creaking of branches during storms represented his physical presence moving among the trees. The maintenance of these sacred groves required specialized knowledge passed down through generations of ritual specialists who understood the proper methods for caring for divine spaces. Certain trees within each grove were designated as particularly sacred, marked by natural signs such as unusual growth patterns, lightning scars that had healed without killing the tree, or the presence of rare bird species that nested only in places touched by divine power. These marked trees became focal points for the most important ceremonies and were protected by strict taboos that regulated who could approach them and under what circumstances. Hilltop sanctuaries represented another crucial aspect of early Perkunas worship, taking advantage of elevated locations where the thunder god's power was most accessible to human experience. These sites were chosen not merely for their height, but for their exposure to atmospheric phenomena, places where lightning strikes were common, where winds gathered unusual strength, or where the sound of thunder seemed to originate. The construction of these sanctuaries required careful attention to natural features that enhanced their connection to the divine realm. The hilltop sanctuaries typically featured stone altars oriented to catch the first light of dawn, when the boundary between earth and sky was most permeable to divine influence. These altars were carved with symbols representing lightning bolts, storm clouds, and oak leaves, creating a visual language that communicated directly with Perkunas without the need for words. The positioning of these carved symbols followed ancient patterns that aligned with astronomical phenomena, particularly the movement of storm systems across the Baltic sky. Among all the trees of the forest, the oak held special significance as the earthly embodiment of Perkunas himself. The ancient Lithuanians observed that lightning struck oak trees more frequently than other species, interpreting this not as mere coincidence, but as evidence of the divine connection between the Thunder God and these mighty trees. The oak's strength, longevity, and resistance to storm damage made it the perfect symbol for Perkunas' enduring power and protective nature. Individual oak trees that had survived multiple lightning strikes became objects of particular veneration, their scarred bark and twisted branches serving as visible proof of their divine encounters. These trees were often hollow at their centres, creating natural chambers where offerings could be placed, and where the sound of wind created haunting music that was interpreted as the voice of Perkunas himself. The acorns from these sacred oaks were collected and used in various rituals, their potential to grow into new trees representing the regenerative power of the Thunder God. The veneration of oak trees extended beyond individual specimens to entire oak forests that were considered sacred domains of Perkunas. These forests were carefully protected from human interference, allowed to grow according to natural patterns that reflected divine will rather than human planning. Within these oak forests, the interplay of light and shadow, the sound of wind through countless leaves, and the deep silence that followed thunderstorms created an atmosphere of profound spiritual power that could be experienced by anyone who entered with proper reverence and preparation. The relationship between Perkunas and the oak tree transcended simple symbolic association, forming instead a profound metaphysical bond that the ancient Baltic peoples understood as fundamental to the structure of reality itself. The oak served as the Thunder God's earthly residence, a living temple where his divine essence could manifest in physical form while maintaining connection to the celestial realm above. This sacred dwelling was not merely a place where Perkunas occasionally visited, but rather the permanent anchor that allowed his cosmic power to influence the mortal world directly and continuously. The concept of the sacred oak as axis mundi, the world tree connecting heaven, earth, and the underworld, permeated Baltic cosmological understanding with remarkable sophistication. Ancient Lithuanians recognized that certain oak trees functioned as cosmic pillars, their roots extending deep into the earth to draw power from the chthonic realm, their trunks providing stability in the middle world of human existence, and their crowns reaching toward the heavens where Perkunas maintained his celestial court. These trees served as conduits through which divine energy flowed between the different levels of reality, making them essential components of the cosmic order itself. The selection of particular oaks for sacred status followed precise criteria that required generations of observation and accumulated wisdom. Priests and ritual specialists examined potential sacred trees for specific characteristics that indicated divine favor, unusual height that exceeded neighboring trees by significant margins, trunk circumference that required multiple people holding hands to encircle, bark patterns that resembled lightning bolts or storm clouds, and branch formations that created natural altars or chambers within the tree's structure. Lightning strikes that left distinctive scarring without killing the tree provided the most definitive proof of Perkunas' direct blessing and presence. The most revered sacred oaks often displayed multiple lightning scars accumulated over centuries of storms, their bark bearing the permanent marks of repeated divine visitation. These scars formed intricate patterns that priests interpreted as sacred script written by Perkunas himself, containing messages about future weather patterns, agricultural prospects, and divine will regarding human affairs. The ability to read these lightning-carved symbols required extensive training in sacred lore and deep understanding of the Thunder God's symbolic language, knowledge that was carefully guarded and transmitted only to worthy initiates. Within the hollow chambers that frequently formed in ancient oak struck by lightning, eternal fires burned continuously in honour of Perkunas throughout the year. These sacred flames were kindled using specific rituals that ensured their divine origin, typically ignited by friction fire created during thunderstorms when the Thunder God's presence was most active and accessible. The maintenance of these eternal fires required constant vigilance from dedicated priests who understood that allowing the flame to die would constitute a grave offence against Perkunas and could result in divine retribution affecting entire communities. The fuel for these sacred fires consisted exclusively of wood from oak trees that had died natural deaths, never from trees that had been deliberately cut down by human hands. Priests collected fallen branches, naturally broken limbs, and wood from oaks that had reached the end of their natural lifespan, treating each piece of fuel as a sacred offering that carried the accumulated power of the tree from which it came. The smoke from these fires was believed to carry prayers and offerings directly to Perkunas in his celestial realm, while the light of the flames served as a beacon that guided the Thunder God's attention to the needs and concerns of his worshippers. The tending of these eternal fires required specialized knowledge of wood selection, flame management, and ritual timing that took decades to master completely. Priests learned to recognize different types of oak wood by their burning characteristics, understanding which pieces would produce the bright flames preferred during festivals, which would create the steady, long-burning coals needed for daily maintenance, and which would generate the aromatic smoke essential for certain ceremonial functions. The colour and behaviour of the flames provided continuous communication from Perkunas, with bright golden flames indicating divine approval, blue-tinged flames suggesting impending storms, and unusually active flames warning of supernatural threats or divine displeasure. The interpretation of natural omens within oak groves constituted one of the most sophisticated aspects of Perkunas' worship, requiring priests to maintain detailed knowledge of normal patterns in order to recognize significant deviations that carried divine messages. The sound of wind through oak leaves created a complex acoustic environment where trained listeners could distinguish between ordinary weather patterns and supernatural communications. Different types of leaf rustling indicated various aspects of divine will. Rapid, chattering sounds warned of approaching storms. Deep, sustained rustling suggested favourable conditions for important undertakings, while sudden silences in the midst of windy conditions indicated that Perkunas was preparing to deliver particularly important messages. The behaviour of wildlife within sacred oak groves provided another crucial source of divine communication that priests monitored constantly throughout the seasonal cycle. Birds that nested in the sacred oaks were considered direct messengers of Perkunas, their flight patterns, nesting choices, and vocal behaviour all carrying significance for human affairs. Ravens and crows held particular importance due to their intelligence and their tendency to gather before storms, while woodpeckers were revered for their ability to find hollow spaces within trees where the Thunder God's presence was strongest. The appearance of unusual bird species in sacred groves, particularly during times of community crisis or important decision-making, was interpreted as direct intervention by Perkunas in human affairs. The growth patterns of oak trees themselves provided long-term omens that guided community planning and major decisions affecting entire regions. Priests observed the direction of new branch growth, the density of acorn production, the timing of leaf emergence and fall, and the overall health of sacred trees as indicators of divine favour or displeasure. Unusually abundant acorn crops predicted years of plenty and suggested that Perkunas approved of current community leadership, while poor acorn production or premature leaf fall warned of difficult times ahead and the need for additional offerings or changes in behaviour to regain divine favour. The symbolic significance of the oak's strength and longevity resonated deeply within Baltic culture as a reflection of Perkunas's eternal dominion over natural forces and human destiny. The oak's ability to withstand centuries of storms, droughts, and other natural challenges demonstrated the same enduring power that characterized the Thunder God himself. Ancient oaks that had survived for many human generations became living testimonies to Perkunas's protective presence, their continued existence proving that divine power could overcome any natural or supernatural threat when properly honoured and maintained. The oak's deep root system, which could extend underground for distances equal to the tree's height, symbolised Perkunas's comprehensive knowledge of earthly affairs and his ability to draw power from hidden sources. Just as the oak's roots penetrated deep into the earth to access water and nutrients invisible to surface observation, Perkunas's awareness extended into the hidden aspects of human nature and natural processes that remained mysterious to ordinary understanding. This underground connection allowed the Thunder God to influence events through subtle means that might not be immediately apparent but would eventually manifest in obvious ways. The seasonal cycle of the oak tree provided a natural calendar for Perkunas worship that aligned religious observances with the Thunder God's varying levels of activity throughout the year. The emergence of new leaves in spring coincided with the return of thunderstorm season and increased ritual activity in sacred groves, while the fall of autumn leaves marked the beginning of the Thunder God's winter dormancy, when different types of ceremonies were appropriate. The production and dispersal of acorns created opportunities for harvest festivals that celebrated Perkunas's role in ensuring agricultural abundance and the continuation of natural cycles. Sacred oak sanctuaries served as the primary centres for the administration of divine justice, where the Thunder God's presence could be invoked to witness oaths, resolve disputes, and render judgment in cases that exceeded human ability to determine truth or appropriate punishment. The natural acoustics of oak groves, where sound carried with unusual clarity and seemed to echo with supernatural resonance, created an atmosphere that impressed upon participants the seriousness of legal proceedings and the certainty that Perkunas was observing and evaluating their words and actions. The swearing of oaths beneath sacred oaks involved elaborate rituals that bound the oath-taker not only to the human community, but directly to Perkunas himself. Participants placed their hands upon the bark of the sacred tree while speaking their promises, creating a physical connection that allowed the Thunder God to monitor their future behaviour and respond appropriately to any violations of their sworn word. The consequences of breaking oaths sworn in Perkunas's presence were understood to be swift and severe, typically manifesting as lightning strikes, storm damage to the oathbreaker's property, or other forms of atmospheric retribution that left no doubt about their divine origin. The resolution of legal disputes within oak sanctuaries often involved appeals to divine judgment through various forms of ordeal or divination that allowed Perkunas to reveal the truth when human investigation proved insufficient. Accused parties might be required to remain within the sacred grove during thunderstorms, with their survival and the behaviour of lightning around them providing evidence of their guilt or innocence. The interpretation of these divine judgments required skilled priests who understood the subtle ways in which Perkunas communicated his verdicts through natural phenomena. The manifestation of Perkunas's presence within oak sanctuaries took many forms that trained observers could recognise and interpret accurately. The sudden appearance of unusual wind patterns that affected only the sacred grove while leaving surrounding areas calm indicated that the Thunder God was actively participating in human proceedings. The spontaneous rustling of leaves on windless days, the creaking of branches without apparent cause, and the appearance of electrical phenomena such as St. Elmo's fire on oak branches during clear weather all served as unmistakable signs of divine presence and attention. The sound of creaking branches carried particular significance in legal proceedings, with different tones and rhythms interpreted as expressions of divine approval or disapproval. Deep, resonant creaking sounds indicated that Perkunas was pleased with the proceedings and would support just outcomes, while sharp, irregular creaking warned that someone present was not being truthful or that the proposed resolution would not serve justice properly. The timing of these sounds in relation to specific statements or proposals allowed skilled interpreters to identify precisely which aspects of the proceedings had attracted divine attention and response. The crackling of electrical energy around sacred oak branches served as the first visible manifestation of Perkunas preparing for battle, but the true spectacle of his divine arsenal revealed itself only when the Thunder God emerged from his earthly sanctuaries to confront threats that required his direct intervention. Ancient Baltic warriors who witnessed these appearances described weapons that defied mortal comprehension, forged from the fundamental forces of the storm itself, and wielded with precision that could split individual raindrops or shatter entire mountain peaks with equal ease. The Thunderbolt Axe represented Perkunas's most iconic weapon, a double-bladed instrument of divine justice that appeared to mortal eyes as pure lightning given solid form. This weapon possessed a crystalline core of concentrated electrical energy surrounded by a handle that shifted between gleaming metal and crackling plasma, depending upon the intensity of the Thunder God's wrath. The axe head itself measured roughly the length of a warrior's forearm, but its true dimensions seemed to fluctuate according to the magnitude of destruction required, expanding to enormous proportions when Perkunas needed to cleave through mountain ranges, or contracting to surgical precision when targeting individual wrongdoers with divine retribution. The forging of this legendary weapon occurred during the primordial storms that shaped the world's initial formation, when raw cosmic energy first condensed into physical matter under the Thunder God's will. Baltic traditions preserve detailed accounts of this creation process, describing how Perkunas gathered lightning from 1,000 different storms, compressing each bolt until it achieved the density of the hardest stone while retaining the explosive power of its original electrical nature. The handle was formed from the heart of the world oak, the cosmic tree that connected all realms of existence, ensuring that the weapon maintained perfect balance between celestial power and earthly stability. The Thunderbolt Axe possessed the unique ability to exist simultaneously in multiple locations, allowing Perkunas to strike numerous targets across vast distances without any delay between attacks. Witnesses reported seeing the weapon appear as a brilliant flash that seemed to originate from directly overhead, regardless of the observer's position relative to storm clouds or other atmospheric phenomena. This omnipresence meant that no enemy of the Thunder God could escape divine judgment by fleeing to remote locations or seeking shelter in underground fortifications, as the axe could manifest wherever Perkunas directed his attention and wrath. The sound produced by the Thunderbolt Axe during combat differed significantly from ordinary thunder, creating a distinctive acoustic signature that experienced warriors learned to recognize and fear. The initial crack of the weapon striking its target produced a sharp metallic ring that echoed with supernatural clarity across impossible distances, followed by a deep, rolling boom that seemed to emerge from the earth itself, rather than the sky above. This unique sound pattern served as both a weapon in its own right, capable of stunning enemies into paralysis, and a warning to allies that divine intervention was actively reshaping the battlefield according to Perkunas's strategic vision. Lightning spears formed the secondary component of the Thunder God's arsenal, manifesting as countless javelins of pure electrical energy that could be hurled with devastating accuracy across any distance. These weapons appeared as brilliant white-blue shafts of light that maintained their coherent form while travelling through the atmosphere, leaving trails of ionized air that glowed for several seconds after their passage. Unlike the Thunderbolt Axe, which required Perkunas's direct handling, the lightning spears could be summoned and directed through pure mental command, allowing the Thunder God to maintain continuous barrages against multiple enemies while simultaneously wielding his primary weapon. Each lightning spear measured approximately twice the length of a mortal warrior's javelin, but their ethereal nature allowed them to penetrate any material substance without being deflected or slowed by physical barriers. Stone walls, metal armor, and even magical protections proved useless against these divine projectiles, which could pass through solid matter to strike their intended targets while leaving surrounding materials completely undamaged. This selective penetration demonstrated the precise control Perkunas maintained over his weapon's effects, ensuring that innocent bystanders remained protected even during the most violent divine interventions. The creation of lightning spears occurred through a process of atmospheric manipulation that drew electrical potential from storm clouds across enormous geographic regions. Perkunas would extend his awareness throughout entire weather systems, identifying pockets of concentrated electrical energy and drawing them together into coherent weapons through focused divine will. This process often resulted in the temporary clearing of storm clouds across hundreds of miles, as their electrical essence was consumed in the formation of divine armaments, creating moments of eerie calm that preceded the Thunder God's most devastating attacks. The targeting system employed by these lightning spears operated according to principles of divine justice, rather than simple physical trajectory, allowing them to seek out specific individuals based on their moral status and actions rather than their physical location. Enemies who had committed particular offences against sacred law found themselves pursued by spears that could change direction in mid-flight, navigate around obstacles, and even wait in concealment before striking when their targets were most vulnerable. This supernatural guidance system ensured that divine retribution reached its intended recipients regardless of any attempts at evasion or protection. The Thunderstones represented perhaps the most physically impressive aspect of Perkunas' arsenal, manifesting as massive projectiles that combine the destructive force of lightning with the crushing impact of enormous boulders. These weapons typically appeared as roughly spherical masses of crystallized electrical energy, their surfaces crackling with continuous discharges that illuminated their dark, translucent cores. The size of individual thunderstones varied according to the scale of destruction required, ranging from projectiles the size of a human head for precision strikes against individual targets to massive spheres larger than entire buildings when Perkunas needed to demolish fortified positions or reshape geographical features. The formation of thunderstones required the Thunder God to compress atmospheric pressure and electrical energy simultaneously, creating dense cores of solidified storm essence surrounded by shells of crackling lightning. This process drew material from both the celestial and terrestrial realms, combining the raw power of cosmic storms with minerals extracted from deep within the earth through Perkunas' connection to the world oak's root system. The resulting weapons possessed the durability to survive impact with any earthly material while retaining enough electrical energy to discharge devastating secondary explosions upon contact with their targets. Ancient accounts describe thunderstones capable of splitting mountain peaks with single impacts, their explosive force creating new valleys and redirecting the course of rivers across entire regions. The craters left by these divine projectiles became sacred sites in their own right, often filling with water to form perfectly circular lakes that never froze even during the harshest winters due to residual electrical energy embedded in the surrounding stone. These impact sites retained their supernatural properties for centuries after the original strikes, serving as permanent reminders of Perkunas' power and locations where his presence could be accessed more easily by mortal worshippers. The trajectory of thunderstones followed patterns that reflected cosmic order rather than simple ballistic physics, their paths through the air creating geometric designs that conveyed symbolic meaning to those capable of interpreting divine messages. Straight, direct flights indicated swift justice being delivered without mercy, while curved or spiraling paths suggested that the Thunder God was providing opportunities for repentance before final judgment. Multiple stones launched simultaneously often created complex aerial patterns that resembled sacred symbols, the intersecting trails writing temporary messages across the sky in languages that transcended mortal understanding. The hammers of Perkūnas represented specialized weapons designed specifically for breaking through supernatural defenses and magical barriers that might resist his other armaments. These divine tools appeared as massive warhammers with heads forged from concentrated thunder and handles wrapped in chains of solidified lightning. The weight of these weapons defied physical laws, somehow managing to be light enough for the Thunder God to wield with single-handed ease, while possessing enough mass to shatter fortifications that had withstood centuries of conventional assault. The striking surfaces of these divine hammers bore intricate patterns that channeled and focused electrical energy with surgical precision, allowing Perkūnas to deliver devastating blows while controlling exactly how much force reached the target and surrounding area. These patterns resembled complex circuit diagrams that distributed impact energy according to predetermined formulas, ensuring that each hammer blow achieved maximum effectiveness against its intended target, while minimizing collateral damage to nearby structures or individuals who did not deserve divine punishment. The supernatural properties of Perkūnas's hammers extended beyond mere physical destruction to include the ability to break curses, dispel magical illusions, and neutralize supernatural threats that conventional weapons could not affect. Evil spirits and demonic entities that proved immune to ordinary forms of attack found themselves completely vulnerable to these divine tools, which could strike incorporeal beings with the same devastating effect they produced against physical targets. The hammer's ability to affect supernatural entities made them essential weapons in Perkūnas's role as protector of the cosmic order against chaotic forces that threatened the stability of reality itself. The maintenance and storage of these divine weapons occurred within specialized armories located in the heart of the most powerful thunderstorms, where constant electrical activity provided the energy necessary to keep the weapons at peak effectiveness. These celestial arsenals appeared to mortal observers as particularly intense areas of storm activity, where lightning struck with unusual frequency and thunder reached volumes that could be heard across entire kingdoms. The weapons themselves rested upon altars of crystallized cloud matter, their electrical emanations creating continuous light shows that illuminated the storm clouds from within. The process of weapon selection and preparation before battle involved complex rituals that aligned each armament with the specific type of divine intervention required by current circumstances. Perkūnas would examine the nature of threats facing his worshippers, the moral status of all parties involved in conflicts, and the broader implications of potential divine actions before choosing the appropriate combination of weapons for each engagement. This careful selection process ensured that divine force was applied with perfect precision, achieving necessary objectives while maintaining the cosmic balance that governed all aspects of existence. The manifestation of Perkūnas's presence on the battlefield transcended mere physical appearance, creating an overwhelming sensory experience that affected every aspect of the natural environment within miles of his location. Storm clouds gathered with supernatural speed whenever the Thunder God prepared for combat, their formation following patterns that defied meteorological explanation as they arranged themselves into perfect geometric configurations that served as platforms for divine action. These clouds possessed unusual density and electrical activity, their internal structure creating natural amphitheatres where the Thunder God's voice could resonate with maximum impact across vast distances. The visual spectacle of Perkūnas's arrival began with subtle changes in atmospheric pressure that caused sensitive individuals to experience physical discomfort and animals to exhibit signs of extreme agitation. The air itself seemed to thicken with electrical potential, creating a tangible sense of impending supernatural intervention that affected both allies and enemies with equal intensity. Lightning began striking with increasing frequency in seemingly random patterns that gradually revealed themselves as components of larger designs, their combined effect creating temporary illumination that transformed night into day across entire battlefields. The Thunder God's physical form, when it became visible to mortal eyes, appeared as a figure of imposing stature whose exact dimensions seemed to shift according to the observer's distance and perspective. His height appeared to range from merely impressive by human standards when viewed from close proximity to absolutely gigantic when seen from afar, suggesting that his divine nature allowed him to exist at multiple scales simultaneously. His muscular build reflected the raw power necessary to wield cosmic forces as weapons, with each movement demonstrating perfect control over strength that could reshape mountains or handle delicate objects with equal precision. Perkūnas's beard represented one of his most distinctive and terrifying features, appearing as a mass of flowing hair that contained actual lightning bolts weaving continuously through its strands. The electrical activity within his beard created constant illumination that shifted between brilliant white, deep blue, and golden yellow, depending upon his emotional state and the intensity of his divine wrath. During moments of particular anger, the beard would expand dramatically in size, while the embedded lightning increased in frequency and brightness, creating a display that could be seen clearly from distances of many miles. The Thunder God's eyes blazed with the same electrical energy that powered his weapons, their intense luminosity making direct eye contact impossible for mortal beings, while simultaneously conveying perfect understanding of his thoughts and intentions to those who dared attempt such visual communion. The colour of his eyes shifted between the brilliant white of lightning strikes and the deep blue of storm clouds, with occasional flashes of golden light that indicated moments of divine approval or satisfaction. These ocular displays served as a form of non-verbal communication that transcended language barriers, allowing Perkunas to convey complex messages through subtle changes in intensity and hue. The voice of Perkunas manifested as thunder that possessed the unique ability to carry distinct words and meanings, despite its overwhelming volume and power. Unlike natural thunder, which produced only noise, the Thunder God's speech created sound waves that organized themselves into comprehensible language that could be understood by listeners regardless of their native tongue. The acoustic properties of his voice allowed it to carry across impossible distances while remaining perfectly clear and intelligible, ensuring that divine commands and pronouncements reach their intended recipients without distortion or misunderstanding. The cosmic struggle between Perkunas and Velnias represented the fundamental axis upon which Baltic cosmology turned, an eternal conflict that shaped not merely the physical world, but the very nature of existence itself. Velnias, known also as Velnias in some regional traditions, embodied the chthonic forces of the underworld, wielding power over death, darkness, and the chaotic energies that constantly threatened to unravel the ordered universe that Perkunas worked tirelessly to maintain. This was not simply a battle between good and evil, but rather a complex struggle between complementary forces whose opposition generated the dynamic tension necessary for life to flourish. The origins of their conflict stretch back to the primordial chaos that preceded creation, when both deities emerged from the formless void with fundamentally incompatible natures that made peaceful coexistence impossible. Perkunas arose as the principle of active order, bringing structure and law to the universe through his mastery of atmospheric forces and divine justice. Velnias manifested as the embodiment of primordial chaos, not seeking to destroy creation but rather to maintain the wild, uncontrolled energies that had existed before divine order imposed its constraints upon reality. Their first confrontation occurred during the initial formation of the world, when Perkunas began organizing the cosmic elements into stable patterns, while Velnias worked to preserve the fluid, ever-changing nature of primordial existence. The Thunder God's lightning strikes carved permanent features into the landscape, creating mountains, valleys, and river channels that would endure for millennia. Velnias responded by opening underground passages and caverns that provided refuge for the chaotic forces displaced by Perkunas's ordering activities, establishing the underworld as a realm where primordial energies could continue to exist and influence the surface world through subtle means. The physical manifestations of their conflict took place across multiple realms simultaneously, with battles raging in the heavens, on the Earth's surface, and in the depths of the underworld according to the shifting balance of power between the two divine forces. Perkūnas dominated the aerial realm, his thunderbolts illuminating the sky as he pursued Velnias across storm clouds and atmospheric currents. The chthonic deity proved equally formidable in underground domains, where his intimate knowledge of subterranean passages and his ability to manipulate earth and stone gave him significant advantages over the Thunder God's primarily atmospheric powers. Velnias possessed extraordinary shape-shifting abilities that allowed him to assume countless different forms during his eternal flight from Perkūnas' wrath, each transformation carefully chosen to exploit specific weaknesses in the Thunder God's attack patterns or to access escape routes unavailable to beings of fixed form. His most common manifestation appeared as a massive serpent whose scales gleamed with an oily, iridescent sheen that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. This serpentine form could stretch across vast distances, allowing Velnias to be present in multiple locations simultaneously, while maintaining the flexibility necessary to navigate complex underground tunnel systems. When pursued across open terrain, Velnias frequently transformed into a gigantic black bull, whose hooves struck sparks from stone as he charged across the landscape, his breath creating clouds of sulphurous vapour that obscured his exact location from Perkūnas' lightning-enhanced vision. The bull form possessed incredible physical strength that allowed Velnias to smash through mountain barriers and create new underground passages by simply charging through solid rock. His horns could gore holes in the earth that extended down to the deepest levels of the underworld, providing instant escape routes when the Thunder God's attacks became too intense to withstand. The transformation into a massive black cat granted Velnias supernatural stealth and agility that made him nearly impossible to target with direct lightning strikes. This feline form could leap impossible distances, scale vertical cliff faces with ease, and squeeze through openings that seemed far too small to accommodate a being of such size. The cat's eyes glowed with an eerie green light that could hypnotize lesser beings and create illusions that confused even Perkūnas' divine perception, making it difficult for the Thunder God to distinguish between the real Velnias and the false images he projected. Perhaps most frustratingly for Perkūnas, Velnias could assume the form of a human being, appearing as an ordinary mortal who blended seamlessly into human communities, while continuing to work his chaotic influence from within civilization itself. These human disguises were perfect in every detail, complete with believable personal histories and social connections that made detection nearly impossible through casual observation. Only the most experienced priests and shamans possessed the spiritual sensitivity necessary to recognize Velnias in human form, and even they required careful observation over extended periods to distinguish his supernatural nature from genuine mortality. The cyclical nature of their eternal conflict reflected the fundamental rhythms that governed natural processes throughout the Baltic world, with the intensity of their battles waxing and waning according to seasonal patterns that influenced weather, agricultural productivity, and the spiritual atmosphere that affected human affairs. During the spring months, when Perkūnas' power reached its peak with the return of thunderstorm season, their battles raged with maximum intensity across the heavens, filling the sky with almost continuous lightning displays that announced the Thunder God's renewed assault on chaotic forces that had gained strength during his winter dormancy. Summer represented the period of Perkūnas' greatest dominance, when his constant presence in the atmosphere through frequent storms kept Velnias confined primarily to underground refuges where his influence on surface events remained limited but never completely eliminated. The Thunder God's lightning strikes during this season served not only as weapons against his eternal enemy, but also as beneficial forces that brought necessary rainfall for crops and cleared the air of harmful influences that might otherwise accumulate and threaten human health and prosperity. The autumn months marked the beginning of Velnias' resurgence as Perkunas' atmospheric power began to wane with the approach of winter. The chthonic deity took advantage of longer nights and cooler temperatures to extend his influence closer to the surface world, working through underground water sources, cave systems, and the root networks of dying vegetation to spread his chaotic energies into areas that had been protected by the Thunder God's summer vigilance. This seasonal shift created a period of increased supernatural activity that required enhanced ritual protection and careful attention to omens and warnings. Winter brought the most dangerous phase of their eternal cycle, when Perkunas' withdrawal to his celestial realm left the surface world more vulnerable to Velnias' underground machinations. The absence of thunderstorms removed the primary barrier that normally contained chthonic influences, allowing Velnias to work more freely through frost, ice, and the extended darkness of winter nights. However, this apparent disadvantage for Perkunas was balanced by Velnias' own limitations during the cold season, when frozen ground restricted his ability to create new underground passages and the dormancy of plant life reduced his access to surface networks. The theft of cattle represented one of the most frequently recurring themes in the legendary encounters between Perkunas and Velnias, reflecting both the practical importance of livestock in Baltic society and the deeper symbolic significance of cattle as representations of divine blessing and earthly prosperity. Velnias' raids on celestial herds were not motivated by simple greed, but by his fundamental opposition to the ordered abundance that Perkunas sought to provide for his mortal worshippers. By stealing divine cattle, the chthonic deity could disrupt the flow of prosperity from the celestial realm to the human world while simultaneously acquiring powerful bargaining tools for use in future confrontations. The celestial cattle possessed supernatural properties that made them far more valuable than ordinary livestock, their milk providing nourishment that could sustain life indefinitely, their hides offering protection against both physical and spiritual threats, and their presence in any location automatically ensuring fertility and abundance for the surrounding area. These divine animals grazed in meadows of cloud stuff high above the earth, tended by lesser deities who served Perkunas in his role as provider of earthly blessings. Their theft required Velnias to venture into the Thunder God's primary domain, making such raids extremely dangerous undertakings that demanded careful planning and perfect timing. Velnias typically executed his cattle raids during periods of atmospheric instability, when storm systems created confusion and visual obstruction that masked his approach to the celestial pastures. His serpentine form proved most effective for these operations, allowing him to slither through cloud formations without creating the disturbances that would alert Perkunas' guardians to his presence. The actual theft required split-second timing, as Velnias had to seize the cattle and retreat to underground refuges before the Thunder God could respond with his devastating lightning attacks. The recovery of stolen cattle invariably led to some of the most spectacular battles between the two deities, with Perkunas pursuing Velnias across vast distances while hurling thunderbolts with increasing fury as the chase continued. These pursuits often lasted for days or weeks, their progress marked by continuous storm activity that followed predictable paths as the Thunder God tracked his enemy's underground movements. The eventual confrontations typically occurred at locations where underground passages intersected with surface features that provided Velnias with multiple escape routes, forcing Perkunas to employ strategic thinking as well as raw power. The abduction of celestial maidens constituted another major category of conflict between Perkunas and Velnias, involving the kidnapping of divine or semi-divine female beings, whose presence in the underworld would corrupt the natural order and provide Velnias with powerful allies in his ongoing struggle against celestial authority. These maidens served various roles in Perkunas' celestial court, from tending the sacred fires that maintained cosmic order to weaving the clouds that carried the Thunder God's messages across the sky. Their loss not only deprived Perkūnas of essential assistance, but also threatened to disrupt fundamental processes that maintained the stability of the natural world. The celestial maidens possessed their own supernatural abilities that made them valuable prizes beyond their symbolic importance as representatives of divine order. Some could control specific weather phenomena, summoning gentle rains for agricultural purposes or dispersing harmful storm systems that threatened human settlements. Others maintained the cosmic looms where the fabric of reality itself was woven, their skilled hands ensuring that the patterns of existence remained stable and predictable. The most powerful among them served as oracles, who could perceive future events and provide Perkūnas with the strategic information necessary for effective governance of cosmic affairs. Velnias' abduction techniques varied according to the specific abilities and vulnerabilities of his intended targets, but most involved elaborate deceptions that exploited the maidens' compassionate natures and their dedication to their divine duties. He might appear in the form of a wounded traveller seeking assistance, knowing that celestial beings were compelled by their nature to provide aid to those in distress. Alternatively, he could create false emergencies that required immediate attention from specific maidens whose particular abilities were needed to address manufactured crises, luring them away from the protection of Perkūnas' immediate presence. The rescue of abducted maidens required Perkūnas to venture into the deepest levels of the underworld, where Velnias possessed overwhelming advantages and could employ the full range of his shapeshifting abilities to avoid direct confrontation while maintaining control over his captives. These rescue missions often involved complex negotiations as well as combat, with Velnias offering to release his captives in exchange for concessions that would advance his chaotic agenda or provide him with strategic advantages in future conflicts. Disputes over sacred waters formed another crucial aspect of their eternal struggle, reflecting the fundamental importance of water sources in both agricultural and spiritual contexts throughout the Baltic world. These conflicts typically centered on springs, wells, and rivers that possessed supernatural properties, their waters capable of healing diseases, granting prophetic visions, or providing protection against supernatural threats. Control over these sacred water sources meant control over their beneficial effects, making them valuable strategic assets that both deities sought to claim for their own purposes. Perkūnas viewed sacred waters as gifts that should flow freely to benefit all who approach them with proper reverence and pure intentions, their healing and protective properties serving his role as guardian of cosmic order and protector of righteous mortals. The Thunder God's lightning strikes often created new springs by fracturing underground rock formations, while his rainfall replenished existing water sources and maintained their supernatural potency through regular infusions of celestial energy. Sacred waters under Perkūnas' protection typically remained clear and pure regardless of external contamination, their surfaces reflecting images that revealed truth and dispelled illusions. Velnias sought to corrupt or control these same water sources for his own chaotic purposes, understanding that access to their power could provide him with valuable tools for spreading his influence throughout the mortal world. His methods of corruption were subtle and difficult to detect, often involving the introduction of underground streams that carried chaotic energies from the deepest levels of the underworld to mix with the pure waters of Perkūnas' springs. Waters corrupted by Velnias' influence retained their supernatural properties, but used them to serve chaotic rather than ordered purposes, granting visions that confused rather than enlightened, or providing healing that came at unexpected spiritual costs. The battles for control of sacred treasures encompass conflicts over magical objects, divine artifacts, and supernatural substances that possess the power to influence the balance between order and chaos throughout the cosmos. These treasures included items forged in the primordial fires of creation, crystallized fragments of pure divine essence, and tools that could manipulate fundamental forces of nature according to the wielder's will and intention. Possession of such artifacts provided significant advantages in the ongoing struggle between the two deities, making their acquisition and protection matters of cosmic importance. The most coveted treasures were those that could influence the boundary between life and death, granting their possessors the ability to restore life to the deceased or to extend mortal existence indefinitely. Perkunas sought to control these artifacts to ensure that death remained a natural transition rather than a tool for chaos, while Velnias desired them to disrupt the ordered progression of life cycles that maintained cosmic stability. Their battles over such treasures often involved complex strategies that spanned multiple generations, with each deity working to position loyal agents who could claim the artifacts when opportunities arose. The underground passages that Velnias created during his escapes from Perkunas' wrath became permanent features of the landscape that continued to serve as conduits for chthonic influence long after their original purpose had been fulfilled. These tunnels connected distant regions through networks that ignored surface geography, allowing chaotic energies to flow between locations that appeared completely separate when viewed from above ground. The existence of these hidden connections meant that Velnias' influence could manifest in unexpected places, far from his actual physical location, during any particular phase of their eternal conflict. The sacred duty of oath enforcement represented perhaps the most fundamental aspect of Perkunas' role as guardian of cosmic order, establishing him as the divine arbiter whose lightning strike served as both witness and executioner for those who dared violate their sworn promises. Unlike mortal judges who could only observe external actions and weigh testimony, the Thunder God possessed perfect knowledge of human intentions and the ability to monitor oath keepers continuously throughout their lives. This supernatural surveillance created a system of divine justice that operated with absolute precision, ensuring that no violation of sacred promises could escape appropriate punishment regardless of how cleverly concealed or how much time elapsed between the oath and its breaking. The process of oath-taking in ancient Baltic society required specific rituals that formally bound the swearer not merely to their human community, but directly to Perkunas himself, creating a spiritual contract that transcended ordinary legal obligations. Participants approached designated sacred oaks during thunderstorm season, when the Thunder God's presence was most active and accessible to mortal supplication. The oath-taker placed both hands against the lightning-scarred bark of the sacred tree while speaking their promises aloud, the physical contact establishing a direct connection that allowed Perkunas to imprint the exact terms of the agreement upon his divine consciousness for future reference and enforcement. The words spoken during these oath ceremonies carried supernatural weight that transformed them from mere human speech into binding cosmic law, each syllable resonating through multiple levels of reality as it was recorded in the Thunder God's perfect memory. Witnesses observed that the sacred oak's leaves would rustle without wind during particularly significant oath-taking ceremonies, indicating that Perkunas was actively listening and accepting the spiritual contract being offered. The appearance of distant thunder on otherwise clear days served as divine confirmation that the oath had been properly received and would be enforced according to its precise terms. The monitoring system employed by Perkunas to track oath compliance operated through a network of supernatural awareness that extended throughout the natural world, utilizing birds, trees, water sources, and atmospheric phenomena as observation points that reported continuously on human behavior. Ravens and crows served as the Thunder God's primary intelligence agents, their superior memory and communication abilities making them ideal for tracking complex human activities across extended time periods. These birds could recognize individual oathbreakers by sight and would gather in unusual numbers around those who were contemplating violations of their sworn promises, serving as both surveillance tools and visible warnings of impending divine attention. The sacred oaks themselves functioned as permanent monitoring stations that maintained continuous awareness of all oaths sworn beneath their branches, their deep root systems connecting to underground networks that carried information across vast distances through methods that transcended ordinary physical communication. The electrical scarring left by Perkūnas' lightning strikes created patterns within the oak's wood that served as natural recording devices, preserving the exact words and intentions of every oath-taker while simultaneously providing the Thunder God with instant access to this information whenever enforcement action became necessary. Water sources blessed by Perkūnas possessed the ability to reveal the truth about oath compliance through various forms of divination that could be performed by trained priests and community leaders. The surface of sacred springs would display images showing the current activities of oathbreakers, while the sound of flowing water in blessed streams could be interpreted by skilled listeners as detailed reports on the moral status of specific individuals. These aquatic surveillance systems provided communities with early warning when oath violations were occurring, allowing for intervention attempts before divine punishment became inevitable. The enforcement mechanisms employed by Perkūnas demonstrated remarkable precision in matching punishment to the specific nature and severity of each oath violation, with lightning strikes calibrated to deliver exactly the appropriate level of retribution without exceeding the bounds of divine justice. Minor violations, such as delayed fulfillment of promises or partial compliance with sworn obligations, typically resulted in warning strikes that damaged property or created frightening but non-lethal experiences designed to encourage immediate correction of behaviour. These preliminary punishments often took the form of lightning that struck very close to the oathbreaker without causing direct harm, accompanied by thunder that seemed to speak the violator's name with unmistakable clarity. More serious violations involving deliberate deception or malicious intent to harm others through oath-breaking triggered correspondingly severe responses that could include direct lightning strikes targeting the offender's person or property. The Thunder God's perfect justice ensured that these punishments affected only the guilty party and their immediate possessions, leaving innocent family members and bystanders completely unharmed even when they stood in close proximity to the target. Witnesses frequently reported seeing lightning bolts curve around innocent individuals to strike oathbreakers with surgical precision, demonstrating Perkūnas' absolute control over his divine weapons. The most egregious oath violations, particularly those involving sacred promises made in matters of life and death or oaths sworn to protect the innocent, provoked the Thunder God's full wrath in the form of devastating lightning strikes that could reduce the offender to ash, while leaving their immediate surroundings completely undamaged. These ultimate punishments served as powerful deterrents that reinforced the absolute sanctity of sworn promises while providing unmistakable proof of divine justice operating in the mortal world. The precise targeting of these final strikes left no doubt about their supernatural origin, as no natural phenomenon could achieve such selective destruction. The timing of divine punishment followed patterns that reflected Perkūnas' deep understanding of human psychology and the educational value of delayed justice, with some oath violations receiving immediate retribution while others were allowed to develop over extended periods before divine intervention occurred. Immediate punishment typically followed violations that posed direct threats to innocent individuals, or that challenged the Thunder God's authority in obvious ways. The swift response served to protect potential victims, while demonstrating that certain boundaries could never be crossed without instant consequences. Delayed punishment often proved more effective for violations involving complex social relationships or situations where immediate divine intervention might cause more harm than the original oath-breaking itself. Perkūnas would allow natural consequences to develop while monitoring the situation carefully, intervening only when it became clear that human justice systems were inadequate to address the violation, or when the oathbreaker showed no signs of genuine repentance. This patient approach allowed for the possibility of redemption while ensuring that justice would ultimately prevail, regardless of human failings. The protection of the World Tree represented Perkūnas' most crucial responsibility as guardian of cosmic order, requiring constant vigilance against chaotic forces that sought to corrupt or destroy the cosmic axis that connected all levels of reality. The World Tree existed simultaneously as a physical oak of enormous proportions and as a metaphysical structure that provided the framework for universal existence, its roots extending deep into the underworld while its crown reached into the highest celestial realms. Any damage to this cosmic pillar would have catastrophic consequences for the stability of reality itself, making its protection a matter of absolute priority that superseded all other divine concerns. The tree's massive trunk served as the central column around which the ordered universe revolved, its bark inscribed with the fundamental laws that governed natural processes and divine authority. These inscriptions appeared as naturally occurring patterns that resembled runic scripts, their meanings accessible only to beings possessing sufficient wisdom and spiritual development to comprehend cosmic principles. Perkūnas maintained these inscriptions through regular applications of controlled lightning that refreshed the patterns and ensured their continued legibility for those authorized to read them. The World Tree's root system extended throughout the underworld in patterns that mirrored the structure of the ordered universe above ground, creating a vast network that monitored and influenced chthonic forces while preventing chaotic energies from accumulating sufficient strength to threaten surface stability. These roots possessed their own form of consciousness that reported directly to Perkūnas about underground activities, providing early warning of threats that might not be visible through atmospheric surveillance. The root network also served as a communication system that connected sacred groves and oak sanctuaries across enormous distances, allowing the Thunder God to coordinate protective activities throughout his earthly domain. The crown of the World Tree reached into atmospheric layers where ordinary weather phenomena originated, its branches serving as natural lightning rods that channeled Perkūnas' electrical energy throughout the cosmic structure. The leaves of these celestial branches were composed of crystallized cloud matter that could store and release electrical energy according to the Thunder God's will, creating a vast battery system that powered his protective activities and provided the energy necessary for maintaining cosmic order. The seasonal cycle of these supernatural leaves followed patterns that influenced weather systems across the entire world, their emergence in spring triggering the return of thunderstorm activity, while their autumn dormancy marked the beginning of Perkūnas' winter withdrawal. The threats to the World Tree came primarily from Velnias and his chaotic allies, who understood that corrupting or destroying the cosmic axis would eliminate the primary source of ordered structure that limited their influence throughout the universe. These attacks took various forms, from direct assaults using underground tunnels that targeted the root system, to subtle corruption attempts that sought to introduce chaotic elements into the tree's life processes. Velnias frequently employed shape-shifting abilities to disguise his agents as beneficial creatures that could approach the World Tree without triggering its natural defences, requiring Perkūnas to maintain constant scrutiny of all beings that came into contact with the cosmic structure. The defensive systems protecting the World Tree operated on multiple levels simultaneously, combining physical barriers with supernatural detection methods and active countermeasures that could respond to threats automatically without requiring Perkūnas' direct attention. The tree's bark possessed the ability to repel most forms of attack through electrical discharges that could be precisely calibrated to match the threat level presented by different types of assault. Minor irritants such as insects or small animals received gentle warnings that encouraged them to seek other locations, while serious threats faced increasingly powerful defensive responses that could ultimately prove lethal if the attacks continued. The atmospheric defences surrounding the World Tree created a zone of perpetual storm activity that served as both protection and early warning system for approaching threats. These storms possessed unusual characteristics that distinguished them from ordinary weather phenomena, their lightning striking in geometric patterns that formed protective barriers while their thunder carried coded messages that alerted Perkunas to the nature and location of detected threats. The storm system could expand or contract according to the current threat level, sometimes extending across entire regions when major assaults were anticipated. The maintenance of universal harmony required Perkunas to balance opposing forces throughout the cosmos, while preventing any single element from gaining sufficient dominance to disrupt the stable patterns that supported ordered existence. This delicate balancing act involved continuous monitoring of natural processes, divine activities, and mortal affairs to identify potential sources of instability before they could develop into serious threats to cosmic order. The Thunder God's perfect understanding of cause and effect relationships allowed him to predict the long-term consequences of current events and take preventive action when necessary. The regulation of seasonal cycles represented one of the most visible aspects of Perkunas's harmony maintenance activities, with his atmospheric interventions ensuring that weather patterns followed predictable sequences that supported agricultural productivity and natural reproduction cycles. The Thunder God's lightning strikes served multiple purposes beyond simple displays of power, often functioning as precise interventions that adjusted atmospheric pressure, electrical charge distribution and moisture content to maintain optimal conditions for plant and animal life. These regulatory activities required split-second timing and perfect coordination across vast geographic areas. The balance between order and chaos demanded that Perkunas allow controlled amounts of chaotic energy to remain active within the ordered universe, recognizing that complete elimination of chaos would result in stagnation and death rather than perfect order. This philosophical understanding led to complex negotiations and temporary truces with Velnias and other chaotic entities, establishing boundaries that contained destructive influences while permitting the creative aspects of chaos to contribute to universal vitality. These agreements required constant renegotiation as circumstances changed and new threats emerged. The establishment of moral laws through Perkunas's divine authority created the ethical framework that governed human behavior and established the standards by which divine justice would be administered. These laws were not arbitrary commands imposed by divine whim, but rather reflections of cosmic principles that maintained universal harmony through the regulation of conscious behavior. The Thunder God's perfect understanding of cause and effect relationships allowed him to formulate moral guidelines that would produce beneficial outcomes when followed, while preventing harmful consequences that could disrupt social stability. The proclamation of divine commandments occurred through thunderous announcements that could be heard across vast distances, with Perkunas's voice carrying clearly despite the overwhelming volume of his speech. These divine pronouncements typically coincided with significant atmospheric disturbances that provided unmistakable evidence of their supernatural origin, while creating appropriate solemnity for the reception of cosmic law. The exact wording of each commandment was preserved through the acoustic properties of sacred groves and hilltop sanctuaries, where the sound waves would continue to resonate long after the initial announcement. The interpretation and application of divine law required specialized knowledge that was carefully transmitted through generations of priests and legal specialists who understood the subtle distinctions between different categories of moral obligation. These religious authorities possessed the training necessary to recognize when specific circumstances might modify the application of general principles while maintaining the essential spirit of divine commandments. Their decisions in complex legal cases were subject to confirmation through various forms of divination that allowed Perkunas to indicate his approval or disapproval of proposed judgments. The intervention in human affairs demonstrated Perkunas's active concern for mortal welfare and his willingness to employ divine power in defense of justice and protection of the innocent. These interventions ranged from subtle influences that guided human decision-making toward beneficial outcomes to dramatic displays of supernatural power that directly altered the course of events when ordinary human efforts proved inadequate. The Thunder God's perfect knowledge of human nature allowed him to choose intervention methods that would achieve necessary objectives while respecting human free will and avoiding unnecessary disruption of natural social processes. The protection of innocent individuals from harm represented one of Perkunas's highest priorities, particularly when the threats involved supernatural enemies or human adversaries whose power exceeded normal defensive capabilities. Children, elderly individuals, and others who lack the physical or social resources necessary for self-protection could appeal directly to the Thunder God for assistance through prayers offered at sacred oak groves or during thunderstorms when his presence was most accessible. These appeals were rarely ignored, though the form of divine assistance might not always match the petitioner's expectations or desires. The punishment of sacred taboo violations required Perkunas to distinguish between innocent mistakes and deliberate violations of known prohibitions, with different categories of offence receiving appropriately scaled responses. Accidental violations typically resulted in warning signs and opportunities for corrective action, while intentional transgressions provoked swift and severe punishment that served as examples for others who might be contemplating similar offences. The Thunder God's justice always included consideration of the violator's knowledge, intentions, and circumstances, ensuring that punishment remained proportionate to actual guilt rather than mere technical violation of rules. The celestial marriage between Perkunas and Saulė represented the fundamental union of atmospheric and solar forces that governed the daily rhythm of Baltic existence, their divine partnership manifesting as the eternal dance between thunder and sunshine that shaped weather patterns throughout the year. Saulė, the radiant sun goddess whose golden chariot crossed the heavens each day, possessed complementary powers that balanced and enhanced Perkunas's stormy dominion over the skies. Where the Thunder God brought the dramatic intensity of lightning and the life-giving power of rain, Saul provided the steady warmth and illumination necessary for agricultural growth and the continuation of natural cycles. Their cosmic courtship had begun during the primordial formation of the world, when both deities recognized that their individual powers, though formidable, could achieve far greater harmony through coordinated action than through separate efforts. Perkunas's lightning strikes could clear the atmosphere and prepare the ground for new growth, but without Saulė's warming rays, the seeds would remain dormant in cold earth. Similarly, Saul's solar energy could encourage plant development, but without the Thunder God's rainfall, even the most fertile soil would become barren wasteland incapable of supporting life. The daily interaction between these divine spouses created the fundamental weather patterns that Baltic peoples observed and celebrated throughout their agricultural calendar. Each dawn brought Saulė's golden chariot rising from her eastern palace, her radiant presence gradually warming the atmosphere and encouraging the formation of the gentle morning mists that Perkunas would later shape into rain-bearing clouds. As the sun goddess reached her zenith at midday, the heated air would begin to rise in powerful currents that provided the Thunder God with the atmospheric energy necessary for afternoon storm development. The afternoon hours witnessed the most spectacular displays of their divine cooperation, as Perkunas's storm clouds would gather in response to the thermal energy generated by Saulė's solar heating. These clouds served multiple purposes in their cosmic partnership, providing necessary shade that prevented Saul's rays from becoming destructively intense, while creating the electrical potential that allowed Perkunas to generate the lightning strikes that would bring beneficial rainfall to the earth below. The timing of these afternoon storms demonstrated their perfect coordination, with thunder and lightning arriving precisely when the accumulated heat of the day required cooling relief. The evening hours marked a period of gentle transition as Saul's chariot began its descent toward the western horizon, her gradually diminishing rays allowing Perkunas's storm systems to dissipate naturally while leaving behind the clear, cool air that would characterize the approaching night. The spectacular sunsets that often followed afternoon thunderstorms resulted from the interaction between Saul's golden light and the water vapour that Perkūnas' storms had released into the atmosphere, creating displays of colour and beauty that served as visible testimony to their harmonious relationship. Their seasonal dance followed more complex patterns that reflected the changing needs of the natural world throughout the annual cycle. During spring, Saul's increasing strength as the days grew longer provided Perkūnas with greater atmospheric energy for the intense storm activity that characterized the growing season. The Thunder God's lightning strikes during this period served to awaken the earth from its winter dormancy, while his rainfall nourished the seeds that had waited through the cold months for conditions suitable for germination and growth. Summer brought the period of their most intense collaboration, with Saul's powerful solar radiation creating the atmospheric instability that allowed Perkūnas to generate the massive thunderstorms that provided essential water for crops during the driest months of the year. Their coordination during this season required precise timing, as storms arriving too early could damage delicate plants, while delayed rainfall could result in drought conditions that would threaten the entire agricultural harvest. The success of this summer partnership determined whether Baltic communities would face abundance or scarcity during the following winter months. Autumn marked the beginning of their gradual separation, as Saul's weakening rays provided less energy for storm formation, requiring Perkūnas to carefully husband his remaining atmospheric power for the most crucial interventions. The harvest season demanded their continued cooperation to ensure that crops could be gathered under favourable weather conditions, with gentle rains that would not damage grain and clear skies that would allow for proper drying and storage of agricultural products. Winter represented their period of greatest separation, with Saul's distant rays providing minimal atmospheric energy, while Perkūnas withdrew to his celestial realm to rest and prepare for the renewed activity that would begin with the spring thaw. This seasonal separation was not complete abandonment, but rather a necessary dormancy that allowed both deities to regenerate their powers for the intensive work that lay ahead with the return of the growing season. The divine offspring of this celestial union inherited aspects of both parents' powers while developing their own specialized roles within the complex hierarchy of atmospheric deities that governed Baltic weather systems. The thunder spirits, born from the union of lightning and sunlight, possessed the ability to generate localized storms with precision that exceeded even their father's capabilities. These lesser deities could create brief but intense rainfall over specific fields that required irrigation, while leaving neighbouring areas completely dry, or generate the precise atmospheric conditions necessary for particular agricultural activities such as grain threshing or hay drying. Each thunder spirit specialized in different aspects of meteorological control, with some focusing on the generation of beneficial rains, while others concentrated on the creation of favorable winds for sailing or the dispersal of harmful atmospheric conditions that might threaten human health. Their smaller size compared to Perkūnas allowed them to work with greater precision in limited areas, making them invaluable for addressing specific local needs that would not justify their father's direct intervention. These spirits maintained constant communication with both parents, reporting on regional conditions and requesting guidance when faced with complex meteorological challenges. The Storm Maidens represented another category of divine offspring, whose heritage combined Saul's nurturing warmth with Perkūnas' dynamic energy to create beings capable of serving as intermediaries between the celestial and terrestrial realms. These graceful entities possessed the ability to travel instantaneously between the heavens and earth, carrying messages from the divine court to mortal worshippers, while simultaneously gathering information about human needs and concerns that required divine attention. Their appearance combined ethereal beauty with unmistakable signs of their stormy heritage, their hair crackling with miniature lightning bolts while their eyes blazed with the golden radiance inherited from their solar mother. The Storm Maiden's primary responsibility involved the maintenance of communication networks that connected scattered Baltic communities with their divine protectors, ensuring that prayers and offerings reached the appropriate deities while divine responses and guidance were delivered to those who needed them most urgently. Their supernatural speed allowed them to cover vast distances in moments, making them ideal messengers for coordinating responses to widespread emergencies such as droughts, floods, or supernatural threats that required immediate divine intervention across multiple regions simultaneously. These divine messengers possess specialized knowledge of human languages and customs that enabled them to communicate effectively with mortal audiences, regardless of regional differences in dialect or cultural practice. Their training included extensive study of human psychology and social dynamics, allowing them to present divine messages in forms that would be readily understood and accepted by their intended recipients. This diplomatic skill proved essential when delivering warnings about impending divine punishment or instructions for complex ritual procedures that required precise execution to achieve their intended effects. The Storm Maidens also served as observers who monitored human behaviour and reported significant developments to their divine parents, their constant presence throughout the mortal world, providing Perkūnas and Saulė with detailed information about conditions that might require divine intervention. Their reports included assessments of crop conditions, observations of human moral behaviour, and early warnings about supernatural threats that might be developing beyond the range of other surveillance systems. This intelligence network enabled the divine couple to respond proactively to emerging problems rather than waiting for crises to develop fully. The atmospheric spirits that served under Perkūnas' direct command formed a complex hierarchy of specialized entities responsible for different aspects of weather control and atmospheric maintenance. The wind spirits possessed the ability to generate air currents with precise direction and intensity. Their service is essential for everything from powering sailing vessels to dispersing harmful vapors that might threaten human settlements. These spirits worked in coordinated teams that could create complex wind patterns spanning vast geographic areas, their efforts requiring careful synchronization to avoid generating destructive conflicts between opposing air masses. The cloud spirits specialized in the formation and manipulation of water vapor, their skills essential for creating the storm systems that Perkūnas employed in his various divine functions. These entities could gather moisture from enormous areas and concentrate it into dense formations capable of producing significant rainfall, or alternatively disperse threatening cloud formations before they could develop into destructive storms. Their work required intimate knowledge of atmospheric pressure systems and the ability to predict how different types of cloud formation would behave under various meteorological conditions. The lightning spirits represented the most specialized category of atmospheric entities, their existence closely tied to Perkūnas' primary weapons and their abilities focused on the generation and control of electrical phenomena. These beings could create lightning strikes with surgical precision, targeting specific locations while avoiding collateral damage to surrounding areas. Their training included extensive study of electrical conductivity in different materials and the ability to calculate optimal strike patterns that would achieve desired effects without exceeding the bounds of divine justice. The rain spirits possessed responsibility for the actual delivery of precipitation once cloud formation and electrical preparation had been completed by their colleagues. These entities could control the size and intensity of raindrops, the duration of rainfall events, and the geographic distribution of precipitation to ensure that water reached areas where it was most needed. Their work required careful coordination with agricultural cycles and human activities to maximize beneficial effects, while minimizing disruption to essential tasks such as harvesting or construction projects. The family dynamics within this divine household reflected the patriarchal structure common to Baltic society, while incorporating the unique challenges and responsibilities associated with cosmic governance. Perkūnas maintained ultimate authority over major decisions affecting weather patterns and divine interventions. but his leadership style emphasized consultation and consensus building rather than arbitrary command. The Thunder God understood that effective coordination of complex meteorological systems required input from specialists who possessed detailed knowledge of local conditions and specific technical expertise. Regular family councils brought together all members of the divine household to discuss current conditions, plan responses to emerging challenges, and coordinate their various activities to ensure maximum effectiveness. These meetings took place within storm systems where the electrical energy provided enhanced communication capabilities and security from potential eavesdropping by chaotic entities. The discussions covered everything from seasonal weather planning to individual cases requiring divine intervention, with each participant contributing their specialized knowledge and perspective to the collective decision-making process. The training and development of younger family members required careful attention to both technical skills and moral education, ensuring that divine offspring would be capable of wielding their inherited powers responsibly when they reach maturity. Perkunas personally supervised the combat training of thunder spirits, teaching them proper techniques for lightning generation and the ethical principles that governed the use of divine weapons. Saulė provided instruction in diplomacy and communication skills, preparing storm maidens for their roles as intermediaries between divine and mortal realms. The assignment of responsibilities within the divine family followed principles that balanced individual strengths and interests with the practical needs of cosmic governance. Thunder spirits with particular aptitudes for precision work might be assigned to agricultural support duties, while those who demonstrated exceptional combat abilities could be deployed against supernatural threats. Storm maidens who showed diplomatic talent were given responsibilities involving human communication, while those with stronger analytical skills might focus on intelligence gathering and threat assessment. The maintenance of family unity required careful management of potentially competing interests and personalities, particularly given the diverse heritage and specialized functions of different family members. Perkunas's leadership emphasized the importance of mutual support and cooperation, teaching his offspring that their individual success depended upon the overall effectiveness of the family unit. Regular rotation of assignments ensured that all family members gained experience in different aspects of divine governance, while preventing the development of rigid territorial divisions that might lead to internal conflicts. The relationship between Perkunas's immediate family and the broader pantheon of Baltic deities involved complex networks of alliance, cooperation, and occasional rivalry that reflected the intricate balance of forces governing the natural world. The Thunder God's position as a major patriarchal figure carried significant influence in divine politics, but it also involved responsibilities for mediating disputes and maintaining stability among deities whose interests might not always align perfectly with atmospheric concerns. The ceremonial calendar governing Perkunas worship followed the natural rhythm of thunderstorm activity throughout the Baltic year, with the most elaborate and significant rituals concentrated during the months when atmospheric conditions favoured the Thunder God's active presence in the mortal realm. The spring awakening ceremonies marked the formal beginning of the ritual season, timed to coincide with the first thunderstorms that announced Perkunas's return from his winter dormancy in the celestial realm. These early season rituals required careful observation of meteorological signs to determine the precise moment when divine attention had shifted back toward earthly affairs, as premature celebrations could fail to attract the Thunder God's notice, while delayed observances might miss the optimal period for establishing communication with the divine realm. The preparation for spring awakening ceremonies began weeks before the anticipated arrival of the first storms, with ritual specialists monitoring atmospheric pressure changes, wind patterns, and the behavior of birds that served as natural indicators of approaching weather systems. Sacred groves required extensive maintenance during this preparatory period, with priests clearing fallen branches and debris that had accumulated during the winter months while carefully preserving any lightning-struck wood that would serve as fuel for ceremonial fires. The selection and preparation of ritual implements demanded particular attention, as tools that had been dormant throughout the winter needed purification and consecration before they could safely channel the renewed divine energies. The actual spring ceremonies commenced with the lighting of new fires using friction methods that generated flames through natural processes, rather than relying on existing sources that might carry contamination from the dormant period. These new fires were kindled at dawn on hilltop sanctuaries, where the first rays of sunlight could combine with the fresh flames to create the optimal conditions for attracting Perkunas' attention. The firelighting process required teams of trained specialists working in precise coordination, their movements following ancient patterns that had been refined over generations to achieve maximum efficiency and spiritual significance. The ritual participants approached the firelighting ceremony wearing garments that had been specially prepared for the occasion, their clothing decorated with symbols representing lightning bolts, oak leaves, and storm clouds embroidered in threads that had been blessed during previous thunderstorms. The colours chosen for ceremonial dress followed strict guidelines that reflected the natural palette of storm systems, with deep blues representing the darkness of rain clouds, brilliant whites symbolising lightning strikes, and golden yellows honouring the moments when sunlight broke through storm formations to illuminate the landscape below. The chanting that accompanied the firelighting ceremony employed ancient Lithuanian words whose meanings had been preserved through oral tradition for countless generations, their pronunciation requiring careful attention to tonal qualities that would resonate properly with the atmospheric conditions present during early spring storms. These sacred songs began with low, rumbling sounds that mimicked distant thunder before building to crescendos that imitated the sharp crack of lightning strikes. The rhythm of the chanting followed patterns that matched the natural cadence of approaching thunderstorms, creating an auditory environment that would feel familiar and welcoming to Perkunas when his attention turned toward the ceremonial site. The role of the Krivis in conducting these elaborate spring ceremonies required extensive training in both the technical aspects of ritual procedure and the spiritual sensitivity necessary to recognize signs of divine approval or displeasure during the proceedings. The Krivis served as the primary intermediary between the human participants and Perkunas himself, their words and actions carrying the collective prayers and offerings of the entire community directly to the Thunder God's attention. This responsibility demanded not only perfect knowledge of ritual protocols, but also the ability to improvise appropriately when unexpected circumstances required modifications to established procedures. The Krivis wore distinctive ceremonial regalia that identified their sacred office, while providing practical protection against the electrical energies that might be present during successful invocation ceremonies. The most important component of this ritual dress consisted of a cloak made from wool that had been gathered from sheep struck by lightning but left unharmed, the fabric possessing natural insulation properties that could protect the wearer from electrical discharge while maintaining conductivity sufficient to allow controlled interaction with divine forces. The cloak's design incorporated intricate patterns that served both decorative and functional purposes, their geometric arrangements helping to channel and focus electrical energy according to the specific requirements of different ritual procedures. The ceremonial staff carried by the Krivis during major rituals was carved from oak wood that had been naturally hollowed by lightning strikes, its interior chamber containing fragments of metal that had been fused by divine electrical energy during previous storms. This staff served multiple functions during ceremonies, acting as a lightning rod that could safely attract and dissipate electrical charges, while also functioning as a communication device that amplified the Krivis' voice when addressing both human participants and divine entities. The staff's acoustic properties allowed it to produce deep, resonant tones when struck against stone altars, these sounds carrying across vast distances to announce the beginning of the important ceremonies to scattered communities throughout the region. The preparation of sacred ale for ritual consumption required specialized knowledge of brewing techniques that incorporated ingredients blessed by previous thunderstorms. The fermentation process carefully timed to coincide with periods of increased atmospheric activity that would enhance the beverage's spiritual potency. The primary ingredient consisted of grain that had been harvested from fields struck by lightning during the growing season. These blessed crops possessing enhanced nutritional and spiritual properties that made them particularly suitable for ceremonial purposes. The water used in brewing came exclusively from springs that had been created or purified by lightning strikes, their mineral content altered by electrical discharge in ways that contributed unique flavours and properties to the finished product. The brewing process itself took place within sacred structures that had been specifically designed to attract and channel atmospheric energy during thunderstorms, their copper fixtures and iron implements serving as conductors that could safely manage electrical charges while preventing dangerous accumulations that might threaten the safety of ritual specialists working within the brewing chambers. The timing of different brewing stages was coordinated with lunar phases and seasonal weather patterns to ensure that fermentation would reach completion during periods when Perkūnas' presence was most active and accessible for the consecration of the finished ale. The consumption of sacred ale during ritual ceremonies required careful attention to quantities and timing that would enhance spiritual receptivity without impairing the participants' ability to perform their ceremonial duties safely and effectively. The crivies determined the appropriate amount for each participant based on their role in the ceremony, their previous experience with sacred substances, and their current spiritual condition as assessed through various forms of divination performed prior to the ritual. The ale was served in vessels carved from lightning-struck wood, their natural electrical scarring creating patterns that were believed to enhance the beverage's sacred properties while providing visual reminders of its divine origins. The effects of properly prepared sacred ale included heightened sensitivity to atmospheric conditions, enhanced ability to perceive subtle signs of divine presence, and increased receptivity to the electrical energies that might be present during successful invocation ceremonies. Participants often reported experiencing synesthetic phenomena where they could see sounds or hear colours, these altered perceptions allowing them to detect divine communications that would be imperceptible under ordinary circumstances. The duration of these enhanced states varied according to individual constitution and the potency of the particular batch of ale, but experienced ritual participants learned to recognise the optimal period for performing the most sensitive aspects of ceremonial procedures. The lighting of bonfires during active thunderstorms represented one of the most dramatic and dangerous aspects of Perkunas worship, requiring participants to maintain large fires in exposed locations while lightning strikes occurred in their immediate vicinity. These ceremonies demonstrated absolute faith in the Thunder God's protective power, while providing him with clearly visible signals that could guide his attention to specific locations where divine intervention might be needed. The fires served multiple purposes beyond simple communication, their smoke carrying prayers and offerings directly to the celestial realm, while their light provided protection against malevolent spirits that might attempt to interfere with the ritual proceedings. The construction of storm bonfires required careful selection of materials that would burn reliably despite the wet conditions typically present during thunderstorms, with specially prepared wood that had been treated with resins and oils that would maintain combustion even when exposed to heavy rainfall. The arrangement of fuel followed specific patterns that created optimal airflow, while providing multiple ignition points that could be lit simultaneously when lightning activity indicated that Perkunas was approaching the ceremonial site. The fire builders worked in teams that could complete their preparations rapidly when weather conditions became favourable, their coordinated efforts essential for successful execution of time-sensitive ritual procedures. The participants in storm bonfire ceremonies wore protective amulets and carried ritual implements that had been specifically consecrated for use during electrical storms, their equipment designed to provide safety while maintaining the spiritual conductivity necessary for effective communication with divine forces. The most experienced participants served as lightning watchers, whose responsibility involved monitoring approaching storms and determining the optimal timing for ignition of the ceremonial fires. These specialists possessed detailed knowledge of storm behaviour and the ability to predict lightning strike patterns with sufficient accuracy to ensure participants' safety, while maximising the ceremonial effectiveness of the ritual proceedings. The blessing of weapons and warriors before battle involved elaborate ceremonies that invoked Perkūnas's protection, while imbuing military equipment with spiritual power that would enhance its effectiveness against both mortal and supernatural enemies. These rituals typically took place at sacred oak groves where the Thunder God's presence was strongest, the natural electrical activity in these locations providing optimal conditions for transferring divine energy into metal weapons and armour. The timing of weapon blessing ceremonies was coordinated with thunderstorm activity whenever possible, as lightning strikes during the ritual process were interpreted as direct signs of divine approval and enhancement of the blessed equipment. The preparation of weapons for blessing required thorough cleaning and polishing that removed all traces of previous use, while creating surfaces capable of receiving and retaining electrical charges imparted during the ceremonial process. Iron weapons received particular attention due to their natural conductivity. Their metal surfaces treated with special oils and polishing compounds that enhanced their ability to hold electrical energy while preventing corrosion that might interfere with their spiritual enhancement. Bronze weapons required different preparation techniques that took into account their unique electrical properties and the specific ways that different metal alloys responded to divine energy infusion. The warriors participating in blessing ceremonies underwent purification rituals that prepared their bodies and spirits for direct contact with divine forces, their physical conditioning supplemented by spiritual exercises that enhanced their ability to channel and utilize the protective energies they would receive. The purification process included ritual bathing in water that had been blessed by previous lightning strikes, dietary restrictions that eliminated foods considered incompatible with electrical energy, and meditation practices that aligned their personal spiritual frequencies with the atmospheric conditions present during thunderstorms. The actual blessing procedure involved the crevice placing each weapon in direct contact with lightning-struck oak wood, while reciting invocations that called upon Perkūnas to imbue the equipment with his protective power and divine guidance. The warriors stood in formation around the sacred grove while this blessing took place, their presence creating a human circuit that helped to channel and distribute the electrical energies being invoked through the ceremonial process. The successful completion of weapon blessing was often marked by visible electrical phenomena such as sparks jumping between metal surfaces, or the appearance of blue flames around the edges of blessed blades. The sacred chants employed during Perkūnas worship preserved ancient Lithuanian linguistic forms that had been maintained specifically for ceremonial use, their archaic grammar and pronunciation creating sounds that resonated with the fundamental frequencies present in thunderstorm activity. These ritual songs were composed in meters that matched the natural rhythm of thunder rolling across the landscape, their syllabic patterns designed to synchronize with the acoustic environment created by active storm systems. The learning of these chants required years of training under experienced chanters who could teach not only the correct words and melodies, but also the proper breathing techniques and vocal projection methods necessary for effective performance during outdoor ceremonies conducted in challenging weather conditions. The most sacred invocations included words whose meanings had been lost to ordinary language, but whose sounds retained their power to attract divine attention and communicate specific requests or offerings to Perkūnas himself. These ancient syllables were believed to contain fragments of the primordial language spoken during the creation of the world, their pronunciation requiring careful attention to tonal qualities that would be recognizable to divine ears. The preservation of these linguistic artifacts represented one of the most important responsibilities of the priestly class, as any corruption or loss of the original sounds could result in the failure of crucial ceremonies and the loss of communication with the Thunder God. The performance of sacred chants during active thunderstorms created acoustic effects that enhanced their spiritual power, while demonstrating the chanter's courage and dedication in the face of potentially dangerous natural phenomena. The sound of human voices harmonizing with thunder created resonant frequencies that could be heard across vast distances, their combined effect serving to announce the presence of active worship to Perkunas while providing spiritual protection for the participants. Experienced chanters learned to time their vocal performances to complement rather than compete with thunder, their voices rising during the quiet intervals between lightning strikes and falling to reverent whispers when divine sounds dominated the acoustic environment. The prayers offered to ensure good harvests incorporated detailed requests for specific weather conditions needed at different stages of the agricultural cycle, the petitioners demonstrating their understanding of farming requirements while acknowledging their dependence upon divine cooperation for successful crop production. These agricultural invocations included appeals for gentle spring rains that would encourage seed germination, moderate summer storms that would provide irrigation without damaging delicate plants, and clear autumn weather that would allow for proper harvesting and grain drying. The timing of harvest prayers was coordinated with planting schedules and crop development stages to ensure that divine assistance would be available when most needed. The ritual offerings accompanying harvest prayers included first fruits and grain samples that demonstrated the quality of crops being grown under Perkunas' protection. These gifts serving both as thanksgiving for past assistance and as requests for continued divine support throughout the remaining growing season. The presentation of these offerings followed elaborate procedures that displayed the agricultural products to maximum advantage while incorporating them into ceremonial fires that would carry their essence to the celestial realm. The smoke from these offering fires was carefully observed for signs indicating divine acceptance or rejection of the gifts, with different smoke patterns interpreted as communications regarding future weather conditions and agricultural prospects. The invocations seeking victory in warfare combined requests for divine protection with appeals for tactical assistance that would enable mortal warriors to overcome their enemies through superior strategy and courage, rather than mere brute force. These military prayers acknowledged that victory depended upon divine favour, while emphasizing the warriors' willingness to fight bravely and honourably in service of their communities and their gods. The language of war prayers incorporated martial imagery and metaphors drawn from thunderstorm activity, comparing the advance of armed forces to the approach of storm fronts and likening the clash of weapons to the sound of thunder rolling across battlefields. The Thunder God's interactions with mortals revealed themselves most vividly through countless folk tales that preserved memories of Perkunas walking among humans in disguise, testing their character while offering opportunities for divine favour to those who demonstrated virtue through their actions. These stories, passed down through generations of Baltic storytellers, described encounters where the mighty deity would assume the appearance of a common traveller, a wounded soldier, or an elderly beggar seeking shelter and assistance from unsuspecting villagers. The Thunder God's disguises were always perfect in their mundane details, complete with appropriate clothing, believable personal histories, and physical characteristics that matched his assumed identity so completely that even the most observant mortals rarely suspected they were dealing with a divine being. In one particularly beloved tale from Lithuanian tradition, Perkunas appeared as a limping woodcutter carrying a bundle of damaged tools, approaching a prosperous farmstead during a severe autumn storm. The farmer's family had already secured their livestock and barricaded their doors against the howling wind when the disguised Thunder God knocked and requested shelter for the night. The farmer's wife initially refused, citing the dangers of admitting strangers during such violent weather, but the young daughter insisted that no traveller should be left to face Perkunas' wrath alone in the darkness. Against her parents' wishes, the girl opened the door and invited the stranger inside, offering him dry clothing, warm food, and a place by their hearth. Throughout the night, the disguised deity observed the family's behaviour with careful attention, noting how the daughter shared her own portion of food to ensure their guest would not go hungry, while her parents grudgingly provided minimal hospitality that met the technical requirements of guest friendship without demonstrating genuine compassion. When morning arrived and the storm had passed, Perkunas revealed his true identity through a display of controlled lightning that illuminated the farmhouse without causing damage. The generous daughter received his blessing in the form of a small oak acorn that would grow into a tree whose fruit would never fail to provide sustenance for her family, while her parents learned that their reluctant hospitality had barely saved them from divine punishment for their lack of charity toward travellers in need. Another widespread story described Perkunas's encounter with a village blacksmith, whose reputation for honest work and fair dealing had reached the Thunder God's attention through the reports of his atmospheric messengers. The deity appeared at the smithy in the guise of a foreign merchant carrying damaged weapons that required expert repair, offering payment in strange coins whose metal seemed to shift colour when examined closely. The blacksmith accepted the commission without questioning the unusual nature of the payment, dedicating himself to restoring the weapons with the same meticulous care he applied to all his work regardless of the customer's apparent wealth or status. During the repair process, the disguised Thunder God tested the blacksmith's integrity through various subtle challenges, leaving valuable materials where they might be easily appropriated and observing whether the craftsman would succumb to temptation when he believed himself unobserved. The blacksmith passed every test, returning excess materials and refusing to accept additional payment for work that had required more time and effort than was originally anticipated. When Perkunas finally revealed his divine nature, the honest craftsman received the gift of a hammer that would never break and an anvil that would shape metal with supernatural precision, tools that enabled him to create works of such quality that nobles travelled from distant kingdoms to commission weapons and implements from his forge. The testing of human virtue through seemingly random encounters became a recurring theme in folk tales that emphasized the importance of treating all individuals with respect and kindness, regardless of their apparent social status or material circumstances. These stories taught that Perkunas might appear at any time and in any form, making it essential for mortals to maintain consistent ethical behaviour, rather than reserving courtesy and generosity for occasions when they might expect recognition or reward. The Thunder God's perfect knowledge of human nature allowed him to design tests that revealed true character by creating situations where individuals had to choose between self-interest and moral obligation without external pressure or observation. The folk tales describing mortals who gained Perkunas's favour through exceptional acts of bravery often featured individuals who risked their lives to protect others from supernatural threats or natural disasters, their courage earning divine recognition and supernatural assistance that enabled them to accomplish seemingly impossible feats. One such story told of a young shepherd who discovered that a malevolent forest spirit had been stealing children from his village during the dark nights of late autumn. Despite lacking weapons or magical protection, the shepherd ventured alone into the haunted woods to confront the creature, armed only with his staff and his determination to protect his community's most vulnerable members. The forest spirit, revealed in the tale as one of Velnias' minor servants, possessed the ability to create illusions that confused travellers and led them astray in the wilderness where they would become lost and eventually perish from exposure or starvation. The shepherd's confrontation with this entity required not only physical courage, but also mental fortitude to resist the creature's attempts at psychological manipulation through terrifying visions and false promises of power and wealth in exchange for abandoning his protective mission. The young man's steadfast refusal to be deterred from his purpose attracted Perkunas's attention, and the Thunder God intervened with a precisely targeted lightning strike that destroyed the malevolent spirit while leaving the shepherd unharmed. As a reward for his bravery, Perkūnas granted the shepherd the ability to see through supernatural disguises and illusions, a gift that enabled him to protect his community from future supernatural threats while serving as an early warning system for the approach of dangerous entities. The shepherd's enhanced perception also allowed him to identify individuals who possessed hidden virtues or concealed malicious intentions, making him a valuable advisor to village leaders who sought guidance in matters requiring careful judgment of human character. His reputation for wisdom and supernatural insight eventually spread throughout the region, attracting visitors who sought his counsel on matters ranging from marriage negotiations to trade agreements. Another category of heroic tales celebrated individuals who demonstrated exceptional wisdom in their interactions with divine forces, using intelligence and understanding rather than physical strength to overcome challenges that threatened their communities. These stories often featured clever farmers or crafters who found innovative solutions to problems that had baffled more conventional thinkers, their creative approaches earning Perkūnas' admiration and supernatural assistance. One particularly intricate tale described a miller whose village faced destruction from a drought that had lasted through an entire growing season, leaving crops withered and water sources nearly exhausted. The miller observed that the drought coincided with the appearance of an unusual stone formation that had emerged from the earth following a series of minor earthquakes. The strange rock seeming to absorb moisture from the surrounding atmosphere without releasing it back into the natural water cycle. Recognizing that this phenomenon might have supernatural origins, the miller conducted careful experiments to determine the stone's properties and their relationship to the local weather patterns. His investigations revealed that the formation was actually a fragment of Velnias' underground realm that had been pushed to the surface by geological forces, its chaotic nature disrupting the normal atmospheric processes that Perkūnas used to bring rainfall to the region. Rather than attempting to destroy the stones through brute force, which might have released their chaotic energies in unpredictable ways, the miller devised a plan to neutralize their disruptive influence through careful application of principles he'd learned from observing thunderstorm behavior. He arranged for the entire village to participate in a coordinated ritual that would channel Perkūnas' electrical energy through a network of metal conductors positioned around the stone formation, the combined effect creating a containment field that would isolate the chaotic influences while allowing normal weather patterns to resume. The success of this innovative approach impressed Perkūnas so greatly that he granted the miller permanent protection against drought and the ability to predict weather patterns with supernatural accuracy. The devotion to justice as a pathway to divine favour appeared in numerous folk tales that described individuals who sacrificed personal advantage to ensure fair treatment for others, their commitment to ethical principles earning Perkūnas' respect and supernatural support in their efforts to maintain social order. These stories often featured judges, village elders, or other community leaders who faced difficult decisions requiring them to choose between popular opinion and moral correctness. Their willingness to endure criticism and potential retaliation for upholding justice, demonstrating the kind of character that attracted the Thunder God's attention and approval. One memorable tale described a village judge who was pressured by wealthy landowners to rule against a poor widow in a property dispute that would have left her homeless and destitute. The legal case involved complex questions about inheritance rights and land boundaries that had been deliberately obscured by the wealthy parties through destruction of key documents and intimidation of potential witnesses. Despite facing threats to his own family's safety and economic security, the judge conducted a thorough investigation that uncovered evidence of fraud and manipulation, ultimately ruling in favour of the widow and ordering the restoration of her rightful property. The wealthy landowner's attempts at revenge against the judge included arson attacks on his home and violent assaults on his family members, but these criminal acts were thwarted by timely lightning strikes that disabled the attackers while leaving their intended victims unharmed. Perkūnas' intervention became increasingly obvious, as the pattern of protective strikes continued, eventually convincing the entire community that the judge enjoyed divine protection due to his commitment to justice. The Thunder God's favour extended beyond mere protection, to include enhanced wisdom in legal matters and the ability to detect lies and deception during court proceedings, gifts that made the judge renowned throughout the region for his fair and accurate judgments. Folktales explaining natural phenomena through Perkūnas' actions provided communities with satisfying narratives that connected dramatic landscape features to memorable stories of divine intervention, these explanations serving both educational and entertainment purposes while reinforcing cultural values about proper relationships between mortals and their divine protectors. The creation of lakes from the Thunder God's footprints represented one of the most widespread categories of these explanatory tales, with numerous bodies of water throughout the Baltic region associated with specific episodes of divine activity that had left permanent marks on the landscape. According to one detailed account from Latvian tradition, a series of perfectly circular lakes in a particular forest region had been formed when Perkunas pursued a group of Velnias' servants who had stolen sacred artifacts from a hilltop sanctuary during a winter night when the Thunder God's attention was focused elsewhere. The thieves had assumed that their crime would go undetected until spring, but the violation of sacred space triggered automatic alarms that immediately alerted Perkunas to the theft regardless of the season. The Thunder God's pursuit of the criminals took the form of a running battle across the frozen landscape, his enormous footsteps breaking through the ice-covered ground to create deep impressions that would later fill with spring meltwater. Each footprint lake possessed unique characteristics that reflected the specific circumstances of its creation, with the deepest lakes marking locations where Perkunas had paused to launch particularly powerful lightning attacks against the fleeing thieves. The water in these divine footprint lakes never froze completely, even during the harshest winters, their thermal properties maintained by residual electrical energy embedded in the surrounding earth. Local communities discovered that fish caught from these lakes possessed enhanced nutritional properties, and that water drawn from them could cure certain ailments, leading to the establishment of seasonal fishing camps and healing centres that brought pilgrims from distant regions. The formation of valleys through Perkunas' battles with chaotic forces provided explanations for dramatic geographical features that seemed too regular or purposeful to have resulted from ordinary natural processes. These tales typically described epic confrontations between the Thunder God and powerful enemies who possessed the ability to reshape terrain during combat, their supernatural abilities creating landscape modifications that would persist long after the original conflicts had been resolved. One particularly elaborate story explained the origin of a long, straight valley that cut through otherwise hilly terrain, its unusual configuration attributed to a lightning bolt of unprecedented size that Perkunas had hurled during a climactic battle with a coalition of forest spirits and underground demons. The valley creation story described how Velnias had assembled an army of chaotic entities in an attempt to overthrow the natural order and establish a realm where his chaotic principles would dominate over Perkunas' structured approach to cosmic governance. The assembled forces included shape-shifting spirits, malevolent earth elementals, and corrupted nature deities who had been seduced by promises of power and freedom from the moral constraints that limited their activities under the Thunder God's rule. Their combined assault on a major sacred grove required Perkunas to respond with unprecedented force, gathering electrical energy from storm systems across the entire region to create a lightning bolt that could penetrate the magical defences protecting the enemy coalition. The resulting lightning strike carved a channel through solid rock and earth that extended for dozens of miles, its path marking the trajectory of divine energy as it sought out and destroyed the assembled chaotic forces. The valley's straight walls and flat floor reflected the concentrated nature of the electrical discharge, while the stream that eventually flowed through the channel carried water that had been purified by contact with the residual divine energy embedded in the surrounding stone. Communities that established settlements along this valley discovered that their crops grew with unusual vigour and that their livestock remained healthy even during epidemic diseases that affected neighbouring regions. The moral lessons embedded in these landscape creation stories emphasise the consequences of challenging divine authority, while illustrating the protective power that Perkūnas could deploy when defending the cosmic order against serious threats. The permanent nature of the geographical changes served as lasting reminders of divine power and the importance of maintaining proper relationships with supernatural forces. Children growing up in communities near these legendary landscape features learn to associate dramatic natural formations with stories that reinforced cultural values about courage, justice, and respect for divine authority. Stories of divine rewards and punishments provided clear illustrations of moral principles while demonstrating the precise nature of Perkūnas' justice in responding to human behaviour. These tales carefully distinguish between different categories of virtue and vice, showing how the Thunder God's responses were calibrated to match both the magnitude and the nature of specific actions taken by mortal individuals. The rewards granted to virtuous individuals typically enhanced their natural abilities or provided them with tools and opportunities that would enable them to serve their communities more effectively, while punishments for wrongdoing were designed to educate rather than simply destroy. A complex tale from Estonian tradition described a merchant who discovered a lost child during a dangerous journey through territory known to be frequented by bandits and supernatural predators. Despite the risks to his own safety and the potential delays to his important business negotiations, the merchant abandoned his original travel plans to ensure the child's safe return to her family. His decision required him to travel through unfamiliar terrain during the beginning of storm season, when Perkūnas' lightning activity made travel particularly hazardous for those who lacked divine protection. The merchant's selfless actions attracted the Thunder God's favourable attention, resulting in supernatural guidance that led him safely through the dangerous territory while protecting him from both natural hazards and hostile encounters with bandits who normally preyed upon lone travellers. When the merchant finally delivered the lost child to her grateful parents, he discovered that his delayed arrival at his business destination had actually worked to his advantage, as his competitors had concluded negotiations during his absence, under terms that proved disastrous when market conditions changed unexpectedly. The merchant's reputation for reliability and moral character, enhanced by stories of his heroic rescue of the lost child, attracted new business opportunities that more than compensated for any losses incurred during his detour. The punishment stories demonstrated equal precision in matching consequences to offences, with Perkūnas' interventions designed to provide clear lessons about the relationship between actions and their inevitable results. These tales often featured individuals who had achieved material success through dishonest means, their apparent prosperity concealing spiritual corruption that would eventually attract divine attention and correction. The Thunder God's punishments typically involved the removal of ill-gotten gains through seemingly natural disasters that affected only the guilty parties while leaving innocent neighbours unharmed. One instructive tale described a landowner who had accumulated extensive holdings through fraudulent legal manipulations that deprived rightful heirs of their inheritance, while corrupting local officials through bribery and intimidation. His criminal activities had continued for years without detection by human authorities, but the accumulated injustices eventually reached a level that demanded divine intervention. Perkūnas' response took the form of a series of precisely targeted lightning strikes that destroyed the fraudulent documents on which the landowner's claims were based, while leaving legitimate records completely unharmed. The supernatural destruction of the false evidence led to investigations that exposed the full extent of the landowner's criminal activities, resulting in the restoration of stolen properties to their rightful owners and the imposition of legal penalties that stripped the offender of his remaining assets. The precision of the lightning strikes that had initiated this process of justice left no doubt about their divine origin, while the timing of their occurrence during a period when natural thunderstorm activity was minimal made their supernatural nature obvious to all observers. The landowner's ultimate fate served as a powerful deterrent to others who might have been tempted to pursue similar fraudulent schemes. The interpretation of thunder and lightning patterns as divine messages required generations of accumulated knowledge passed down through lineages of storm readers who dedicated their lives to understanding the subtle variations in atmospheric phenomena that distinguished ordinary weather from supernatural communication. These specialists learned to recognize dozens of distinct thunder types, each carrying specific meanings that could guide crucial decisions affecting entire communities. The deep rolling thunder that began as a whisper and gradually built to overwhelming volume indicated Perkūnas' approval of proposed actions, while sharp staccato bursts warned of impending danger or divine displeasure with current circumstances. Lightning patterns provided even more precise information than thunder sounds, their visual characteristics revealing detailed messages about timing, direction, and the nature of divine intervention being offered or threatened. Single lightning bolts that struck from clear skies carried the most urgent communications, their unexpected appearance demanding immediate attention and response from those who witnessed them. Multiple strikes occurring in rapid succession created geometric patterns across the sky that trained observers could read like written text, the angles and intersections between lightning paths conveying complex instructions or warnings about future events. The colour variations in lightning flashes held particular significance for interpreting divine intentions, with different hues indicating specific types of messages or the emotional state of the Thunder God during communication attempts. Brilliant white lightning represented pure divine energy carrying messages of ultimate importance, typically appearing during moments when Perkūnas needed to communicate decisions that would affect entire regions or generations. Blue-tinged lightning indicated protective warnings, alerting observers to supernatural threats or hidden dangers that required immediate defensive action to prevent serious harm. Golden lightning, the rarest and most auspicious form of divine communication, appeared only when Perkūnas wished to bestow exceptional blessings or announce events of cosmic significance. Witnesses to golden lightning strikes reported experiencing profound spiritual revelations and enhanced understanding of their place within the cosmic order. The metallic quality of these special lightning bolts created distinctive acoustic signatures that differed markedly from ordinary thunder, their sounds carrying musical tones that seemed to resonate directly with the observer's soul, rather than merely reaching their ears through normal hearing processes. Red lightning served as the most ominous form of divine communication, its crimson hue warning of impending divine punishment or catastrophic events that could not be prevented through human action. These blood-coloured bolts typically appeared during the final stages of Perkūnas' patience with persistent wrongdoing, their appearance giving communities brief opportunities to identify and address the sources of divine displeasure before more severe consequences manifested. The psychological impact of red lightning was so intense that entire populations would undergo immediate moral examinations and public confessions when such phenomena appeared in their vicinity. The timing of lightning strikes relative to human activities provided additional layers of meaning that experienced interpreters could decode to understand divine responses to specific questions or proposals. Lightning that occurred immediately following spoken prayers or ritual invocations indicated direct divine acknowledgement of the communication, with the intensity and duration of the electrical display reflecting the level of attention the Thunder God was prepared to devote to the matter at hand. Delayed lightning responses, arriving minutes or hours after ritual activities, suggested that Perkunas was considering the request carefully and would provide his answer through subsequent natural phenomena or events. Lightning strikes that occurred during significant community discussions or decision-making processes were interpreted as divine participation in human deliberations, the Thunder God's electrical interventions serving to emphasize particular points or redirect conversations toward more productive topics. Skilled political and religious leaders learn to recognize these divine contributions to their meetings, adjusting their arguments and proposals to align with the guidance being offered through atmospheric phenomena. The most successful community leaders develop the ability to conduct entire negotiations through this form of divine consultation, using lightning patterns to confirm agreements and identify potential sources of future conflict. The directional characteristics of lightning strikes provided crucial information about the geographic scope and target areas of divine messages, with bolts originating from specific compass directions carrying meanings related to the spiritual significance of those orientations within Baltic cosmology. Lightning from the east, the direction of sunrise and new beginnings, typically announced opportunities for positive change, or the arrival of beneficial influences that would improve current circumstances. Eastern lightning often preceded the discovery of new resources, successful harvest seasons, or the arrival of helpful allies during times of crisis. Northern lightning carried warnings about supernatural threats or invasions by chaotic forces that required immediate defensive preparations to prevent serious damage to community welfare. The association between the north and the realm of winter spirits made lightning from this direction particularly significant during seasonal transitions, when the balance between order and chaos was most vulnerable to disruption. Communities that received northern lightning warnings would implement enhanced protective rituals and increase their vigilance against both natural disasters and supernatural attacks. Southern lightning indicated divine approval for expansion activities, trade expeditions, or other ventures that required travel beyond familiar territories. The warm associations of the southern direction made lightning from this quarter particularly auspicious for agricultural planning, marriage negotiations, and other activities related to growth and prosperity. Military leaders often waited for southern lightning before launching campaigns or establishing new settlements, interpreting such signs as guarantees of divine support for their expansion efforts. Western lightning, associated with endings and transitions, typically warned of approaching changes that would require careful preparation and adaptation to new circumstances. These warnings were not necessarily negative, but they indicated that current situations were unstable and would soon be transformed in ways that might catch unprepared communities off guard. Western lightning often preceded political changes, natural disasters, or other events that would require communities to abandon established routines and develop new approaches to familiar challenges. The flight patterns of birds during storms provided another crucial source of divine communication that complemented the information available through direct observation of lightning and thunder phenomena. Ravens and crows, Perkūnas' primary avian messengers, exhibited distinctive behavioral changes when carrying supernatural communications, their normal flight patterns becoming more purposeful and geometric as they traced invisible messages across the sky. Trained observers could follow these aerial paths to decode complex instructions about timing, location, and the nature of actions required to address current circumstances. The altitude at which messenger birds flew during storms indicated the urgency and importance of their communications, with higher flights carrying messages of cosmic significance, while lower patterns dealt with more immediate local concerns. Birds flying in perfect formation despite turbulent wind conditions demonstrated that they were under direct divine control, their synchronized movements creating living symbols that could be interpreted by specialists familiar with the Thunder God's symbolic vocabulary. The most experienced bird readers could distinguish between different types of divine messages based on subtle variations in wing position, flight speed, and the acoustic patterns created by coordinated wing beats. The behavior of other wildlife species during thunderstorms provided additional sources of interpretive information that helped confirm and clarify messages received through lightning observation and bird flight analysis. Horses became particularly sensitive to electrical charges in the atmosphere, their nervous behavior and directional preferences indicating the presence and location of supernatural activities that might not be immediately visible to human observers. experienced horse handlers learned to read their animals' reactions as early warning systems for approaching divine interventions or supernatural threats. Cattle and sheep exhibited different but equally informative responses to supernatural atmospheric conditions, their herding behaviours and grazing patterns changing in ways that reflected the spiritual influences affecting the immediate environment. Livestock that suddenly refused to enter particular areas, or that gathered in unusual formations, were responding to supernatural presences or residual energies that required investigation by qualified religious specialists. The most skilled herders could predict weather changes and identify spiritually significant locations based entirely on their animals' behavioural patterns during storm conditions. The interpretation of lightning strike patterns on the ground provided detailed information about the specific nature and duration of divine interventions being offered or threatened in particular locations. Lightning that struck trees without causing permanent damage indicated protective blessings that would shield the immediate area from future harm, while strikes that created distinctive scarring patterns conveyed specific instructions about ritual procedures or behavioural changes required to maintain divine favour. The geometric shapes created by multiple lightning strikes in confined areas formed temporary sacred symbols that could be read like written messages for those who possessed the necessary interpretive skills. Lightning strikes that created unusual mineral formations or that altered the chemical composition of soil and water sources provided long-term signs that continued to communicate divine intentions for years or decades after the original electrical discharge. These permanent modifications to the natural environment served as ongoing reminders of divine attention, while creating sacred sites that could be used for future divination and ritual activities. Communities that maintained careful records of lightning strike locations and their associated mineral changes developed detailed maps of supernatural influence that guided their spiritual and practical decision-making processes. The sound patterns created by thunder rolling across different types of terrain provided acoustic signatures that experienced listeners could interpret as specific types of divine communication. Thunder that echoed from mountain valleys created resonant frequencies that differed significantly from the sounds produced by electrical activity over flat plains or forested areas. These acoustic variations carried distinct meanings related to the geographic and spiritual characteristics of the locations where they originated, allowing skilled interpreters to understand not only what Perkunas was communicating, but also where his attention was focused during particular storm events. The duration and intensity of thunder sounds provided additional information about the persistence and strength of divine emotions or intentions being expressed through atmospheric phenomena. Brief, sharp thunder indicated quick decisions or immediate responses to current situations, while prolonged rumbling suggested that Perkunas was engaged in complex deliberations that would require extended time periods before reaching final resolution. The volume and clarity of thunder sounds reflected the Thunder God's level of certainty about his communications, with louder, clearer sounds indicating firm decisions and softer, more ambiguous sounds suggesting tentative guidance that might change based on human responses. Sacred divination methods involving oak materials required specialized preparation and handling techniques that preserved the spiritual potency of these divine substances while ensuring accurate interpretation of the messages they contained. Oak leaves collected during thunderstorms possessed enhanced divinatory properties that made them particularly effective for determining divine will regarding specific questions or proposed courses of action. The collection process required careful timing to gather leaves at the moment when lightning activity was most intense, their exposure to electrical energy imbuing them with supernatural sensitivity that would fade if not properly preserved and utilized. The preparation of oak leaves for divination involved specific drying and storage procedures that maintained their electrical conductivity while preventing deterioration that might interfere with their supernatural properties. Leaves were arranged in geometric patterns that reflected the lightning configurations present during their collection. these arrangements serving as focusing devices that concentrated residual divine energy for maximum effectiveness during divination ceremonies. The most potent leaves came from trees that had been struck multiple times by lightning. Their accumulated electrical exposure creating divinatory tools of exceptional accuracy and reliability. Acorn divination represented one of the most sophisticated forms of oak-based fortune-telling, utilizing the natural variations in size, shape, and internal structure of these seeds to reveal information about future events and divine intentions. Acorns collected from lightning-struck trees possessed enhanced divinatory properties that made them capable of providing detailed answers to complex questions about timing, probability, and the likely consequences of different courses of action. The interpretation of acorn patterns required extensive training in the symbolic meanings associated with different physical characteristics and their combinations. The casting of acorns onto specially prepared surfaces created random patterns that skilled diviners could read as detailed predictions about future events or guidance for current decision-making processes. The surfaces used for acorn casting were typically made from wood taken from sacred oaks, their grain patterns and electrical scarring creating natural reference grids that helped interpreters understand the spatial relationships between different acorns and their associated meanings. The most experienced acorn readers could provide remarkably specific predictions about weather patterns, agricultural prospects, and political developments based on the geometric arrangements created by randomly scattered seeds. The use of lightning-struck wood for divination tools created implements that maintained direct connections to Perkūnas' divine energy, their supernatural properties making them particularly effective for communicating with the Thunder God during ritual ceremonies. Divination staffs carved from lightning-struck oak possess the ability to detect electrical charges in the atmosphere, their responses to supernatural presences providing immediate feedback about the accuracy of interpretive efforts and the presence of divine attention during divination sessions. These staffs would vibrate, grow warm, or emit faint crackling sounds when their wielders achieved successful communication with divine forces. The role of storm omens in warfare decisions required military leaders to maintain constant awareness of atmospheric conditions and their potential significance for battle planning and strategic timing. Lightning strikes near military camps or along proposed march routes were interpreted as divine commentary on planned operations, with different strike patterns indicating approval, warnings, or specific tactical recommendations from Perkūnas himself. Experienced military commanders learned to coordinate their strategic planning with storm observation, using divine guidance to optimize their chances of success while avoiding conflicts that lack supernatural support. The timing of military operations based on storm omens required careful balance between tactical considerations and divine guidance, as battles initiated during periods of favorable atmospheric activity typically achieved better outcomes than those conducted when weather signs indicated divine displeasure or distraction. Lightning that struck enemy positions or equipment was interpreted as direct divine intervention in favor of Perkūnas' followers, while strikes that affected friendly forces served as warnings about tactical mistakes or strategic miscalculations that required immediate correction. Agricultural decisions based on storm omens determined planting schedules, harvest timing, and crop selection strategies that could mean the difference between abundance and famine for entire communities. Lightning strikes in agricultural areas provided detailed information about soil conditions, optimal planting locations, and the types of crops most likely to succeed under current supernatural influences. Farmers who maintained careful records of lightning strike patterns and their correlation with agricultural outcomes developed sophisticated prediction systems that enabled them to achieve consistently superior harvests compared to those who relied solely on conventional weather observation. The interpretation of storm signs for marriage and family decisions required understanding of the symbolic relationships between atmospheric phenomena and human fertility, compatibility, and domestic harmony. Lightning that occurred during wedding ceremonies was interpreted as divine blessing or warning depending on its specific characteristics, with different colours and patterns indicating various aspects of the couple's future relationship and their likelihood of producing healthy offspring. Families planning marriages would often delay ceremonies until atmospheric conditions provided favourable omens for the proposed union. The enduring power of Perkunas manifested most clearly through the persistent devotion of Baltic communities who maintained their storm worship practices across countless generations, their reverence for thunder continuing unbroken despite political upheavals, foreign invasions, and changing religious influences that swept across the region throughout the centuries. Sacred oak groves that had witnessed continuous ritual activity for over 1,000 years stood as living testimonies to the Thunder God's permanent presence in the spiritual landscape of Lithuania, Latvia, and surrounding territories. These ancient sanctuaries retained their supernatural potency through the accumulated power of countless ceremonies, their lightning-scarred trees serving as conduits that connected each new generation of worshippers with the divine energy that had blessed their ancestors. The transmission of storm worship knowledge from parents to children created unbroken chains of religious understanding that preserved not only the technical aspects of ritual procedure, but also the deep spiritual insights necessary for authentic communication with divine forces. Elderly priests who had spent decades interpreting atmospheric phenomena passed their accumulated wisdom to carefully selected apprentices, ensuring that the subtle distinctions between different types of lightning patterns and thunder sounds would not be lost to future generations. These teaching relationships often spanned 20 or 30 years, with master interpreters gradually revealing increasingly sophisticated levels of storm reading knowledge as their students demonstrated readiness for more advanced spiritual responsibilities. The seasonal renewal of storm worship activities demonstrated the cyclical nature of Perkunas' relationship with the mortal world. His annual return from winter dormancy celebrated with elaborate ceremonies that re-established communication channels between human communities and their divine protector. Spring awakening rituals grew more elaborate over time as communities added new elements to traditional procedures, their enhanced ceremonies reflecting accumulated understanding of the Thunder God's preferences and the most effective methods for attracting his favourable attention. These evolving traditions maintained their essential spiritual core, while adapting to changing circumstances and incorporating insights gained through centuries of practical experience. Village festivals honouring Perkunas became central organising events that strengthened community bonds while providing opportunities for collective worship that amplified the spiritual power of individual devotional practices. These gatherings brought together families from scattered farmsteads and isolated settlements, creating temporary communities united by shared reverence for the Thunder God and common dependence upon his protective intervention in their daily lives. The social aspects of storm worship reinforced its religious significance, as participants experienced first-hand the strength that came from unified devotional activity and coordinated ritual procedures. The construction and maintenance of permanent storm shrines required community cooperation that extended across multiple generations, with each family contributing labour, materials and specialised skills necessary for creating sacred spaces worthy of divine attention. Stone altars positioned to catch lightning strikes demanded precise engineering knowledge combined with spiritual sensitivity to identify locations where atmospheric conditions would favour regular electrical activity. The craftsmen who built these structures passed their technical expertise to their descendants, along with the sacred responsibilities associated with maintaining divine architecture. Lightning rod systems incorporated into shrine designs demonstrated sophisticated understanding of electrical phenomena that combined practical safety considerations with religious requirements for channeling divine energy safely through sacred structures. These early lightning protection systems utilized bronze and iron components arranged in geometric patterns that reflected both engineering principles and symbolic representations of cosmic order. The successful operation of these systems over centuries provided concrete evidence of human ability to work cooperatively with divine forces rather than simply submitting passively to supernatural power. The epic confrontations between Perkunas and his eternal adversary Velnias reached their most spectacular intensity during the climactic battles that determined the fate of entire cosmic cycles, their supernatural combat reshaping both the physical landscape and the spiritual atmosphere that governed mortal existence. The final defeat of a massive chaotic coalition assembled by Velnias required Perkunas to unleash the full extent of his atmospheric arsenal, creating thunderstorms of unprecedented scale that covered multiple kingdoms while maintaining precise control over their destructive and beneficial effects. Lightning strikes numbering in the thousands illuminated battlefields where divine and demonic forces clashed in combat that lasted for days without pause. The Thunder God's ultimate victory in this cosmic conflict involved the deployment of a lightning weapon so powerful that its creation required him to draw electrical energy from storm systems across the entire Baltic region, temporarily clearing the skies of all clouds as their electrical potential was concentrated into a single, devastating bolt. This ultimate thunderbolt possessed the ability to penetrate any defense while seeking out its target with supernatural intelligence that could distinguish between chaotic entities and innocent bystanders caught in the battle zone. The weapon's impact created a crater that later filled with water to become the largest lake in the region, its perfectly circular shape and unusual depth providing permanent testimony to the power unleashed during this decisive confrontation. The aftermath of this climactic battle established new boundaries between ordered and chaotic realms that would govern supernatural activities for generations to come. Velnias' defeat forcing him to accept limitations on his disruptive activities while acknowledging Perkunas' supreme authority over atmospheric phenomena. The terms of their supernatural armistice included provisions for controlled outlets that allowed chaotic energies to contribute to natural processes without threatening the stability of cosmic order. Underground volcanic activity, earthquake zones, and areas of unusual magnetic phenomena provided designated channels where Velnias could exercise his chaotic nature without interfering with weather patterns or agricultural cycles. The restoration of cosmic balance following this epic confrontation required Perkunas to repair damage inflicted on the world tree during the supernatural combat, his lightning strikes serving not as weapons but as healing energy that restored the cosmic axis to full functionality. The Thunder God's careful reconstruction of damaged root systems and branch networks demonstrated his role as protector and maintainer of universal order rather than merely a destructive force wielding unlimited power. The renewed world tree exhibited enhanced resistance to future chaotic attacks, while maintaining its essential function as the structural foundation supporting all levels of reality. Perkunas' intervention in the legendary siege of a major Baltic fortress demonstrated his willingness to deploy divine power in defense of communities that maintained proper relationships with supernatural forces while honoring their obligations to cosmic order. The fortress had withstood conventional assault for months when enemy forces began employing magical weapons and supernatural allies that threatened to overwhelm the defenders' purely mortal resistance capabilities. The Thunder God's response took the form of a precisely coordinated lightning barrage that disabled enemy siege equipment while creating protective barriers around the fortress walls that deflected magical attacks without harming the defending soldiers. The siege's conclusion involved a spectacular display of divine justice as Perkunas' lightning strikes selectively targeted enemy commanders who had violated sacred laws of warfare while sparing common soldiers who had been compelled to participate in the assault against their will. The precision of these selective strikes left no doubt about their supernatural origin, while their moral discrimination demonstrated the Thunder God's perfect knowledge of individual guilt and innocence, even within the chaos of large-scale military conflict. The surviving enemy forces withdrew in recognition that they faced divine opposition that could not be overcome through conventional military means. The rescue of an entire community from a supernatural plague required Perkūnas to coordinate his atmospheric interventions with the healing powers of other divine entities, his lightning strikes serving to purify contaminated water sources, while his rainfall washed away spiritual pollutants that had accumulated in the affected area. The plague had been caused by Velnias' corruption of underground springs that supplied drinking water to several villages, the chaotic deity's influence transforming beneficial waters into sources of disease and madness that threatened to destroy entire populations. Perkunas' purification process involved controlled electrical discharges that neutralized the chaotic contamination while restoring the natural mineral balance necessary for healthy water. The Thunder God's healing intervention extended beyond simple purification to include the creation of new water sources that would remain permanently protected against future contamination attempts. Lightning strikes at carefully selected locations fractured underground rock formations to release pure spring water that had been isolated from surface contamination for centuries. These new springs possessed enhanced healing properties due to their exposure to divine electrical energy, their waters proving effective against diseases and spiritual ailments that had previously been considered incurable. The prophetic aspects of Perkunas worship developed from centuries of careful observation, documenting correlations between specific atmospheric phenomena and subsequent historical events, creating prediction systems that enabled communities to prepare for challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. Storm readers who maintained detailed records of lightning patterns and their associated outcomes developed increasingly sophisticated methods for interpreting divine communications about future weather conditions, political developments, and supernatural activities that would affect regional stability. These prophetic traditions required constant refinement, as changing circumstances created new categories of events that demanded fresh interpretive approaches. The training of prophetic specialists involved decades of study combining meteorological observation with historical analysis, theological understanding, and practical experience interpreting atmospheric omens during actual crisis situations. Master prophets tested their apprentices' abilities by presenting them with historical weather records and requiring accurate predictions about the events that followed specific storm patterns. Only students who demonstrated consistent accuracy in these retrospective analyses were permitted to attempt predictions about future events, their training emphasizing the serious responsibilities associated with prophetic pronouncements that could influence major community decisions. Visions received during thunderstorms provided the most direct form of prophetic communication, with specially trained seers experiencing supernatural awareness that revealed future events in symbolic form that required careful interpretation to understand their practical implications. These visions typically occurred when lightning strikes created unusual electrical fields around sacred oak groves, the enhanced atmospheric conditions enabling human consciousness to perceive information that normally remained beyond mortal awareness. The most powerful visions revealed events that would occur decades or centuries in the future, their long-term perspective enabling communities to make preparations that would benefit multiple generations. The interpretation of prophetic visions required collaborative efforts involving multiple specialists who contributed different types of expertise necessary for understanding complex symbolic communications. Historians provided context about past events that might be repeating in cyclical patterns, while theologians offered insights about divine intentions and the spiritual significance of revealed information. Military advisors helped interpret visions related to future conflicts, while agricultural experts contributed understanding about farming implications of predicted weather patterns and environmental changes. The documentation of prophetic revelations created extensive archives that served as reference materials for future interpretation efforts, while providing historical records that could be used to verify the accuracy of past predictions. These prophetic libraries contained detailed descriptions of visions, along with analyses of their symbolic content and records of their eventual fulfillment or failure. The most successful prophets achieved accuracy rates that exceeded normal probability by significant margins, their consistent success providing evidence of genuine supernatural communication rather than mere coincidental speculation. The significance of future storms for Baltic peoples extended beyond immediate weather concerns to encompass their role as markers of cosmic cycles that would determine the spiritual and material prosperity of entire civilizations. Prophetic traditions identified recurring patterns of atmospheric activity that corresponded to periods of cultural flourishing or decline, their cyclical nature enabling long-term planning that could optimize community development while minimizing exposure to predictable challenges. The most important prophetic cycles spanned multiple centuries, their completion marked by atmospheric phenomena of exceptional intensity that announced transitions between different historical epochs. The prediction of generational challenges enabled communities to implement educational and cultural programs designed to prepare future leaders for specific types of difficulties that would emerge during their lifetimes. Young people identified through divination as destined for leadership roles received specialized training that emphasized skills and knowledge relevant to the particular challenges they would face. This prophetic guidance system created remarkably effective leadership development programs that produced individuals capable of guiding their communities successfully through predicted crises. The timeless nature of Perkunas' dominion manifested through his continued presence in atmospheric phenomena that remained essentially unchanged despite the passage of centuries and the transformation of human societies that looked to the skies for divine guidance. Thunder continued to roll across Baltic landscapes with the same acoustic signatures that had announced the Thunder God's presence to countless previous generations, its familiar sounds providing reassurance of divine continuity amid the uncertainties of mortal existence. Lightning strikes retained their power to inspire awe and reverence, while serving practical functions that connected each generation of worshippers with the accumulated spiritual heritage of their ancestors. The persistence of atmospheric patterns that had characterized Perkunas' activities for millennia demonstrated the stability of cosmic order despite periodic challenges from chaotic forces that sought to disrupt established natural processes. Seasonal weather cycles continue to follow predictable sequences that enabled agricultural planning and community organization, their reliability serving as evidence of divine commitment to maintaining conditions suitable for mortal prosperity. The occasional variations in these patterns provided opportunities for divine communication without threatening the fundamental stability that supported civilized existence. The voice of Perkunas continued to echo across the heavens through thunder that carried the same authority and wisdom that had guided Baltic communities throughout their history, its messages remaining relevant and comprehensible to those who maintained the traditional knowledge necessary for understanding atmospheric communications. Each thunderstorm brought renewed contact with divine consciousness that transcended temporal limitations, connecting contemporary worshippers with the eternal presence that had blessed and protected their people since the beginning of recorded time. The consistency of these divine communications provided spiritual continuity that enabled communities to maintain their cultural identity despite external pressures and internal changes. Modern lightning strikes retain the same capacity for conveying divine judgment and blessing that had characterized Perkunas' interventions throughout history, their selective targeting demonstrating continued divine attention to human moral behavior and community welfare. Sacred oak groves continued to attract lightning with frequencies that exceeded statistical probability. their supernatural magnetism providing ongoing evidence of divine presence that could not be explained through purely natural phenomena. These contemporary manifestations of ancient patterns assured believers that their traditional understanding of divine-human relationships remained valid and effective. The eternal thunder served as a cosmic reminder that divine power operated according to principles that transcended human understanding, while remaining accessible to those who approach supernatural forces with appropriate reverence and preparation. Perkunas's dominion over atmospheric phenomena represented a permanent aspect of reality that would continue regardless of human beliefs or acknowledgement, its independence from mortal opinion demonstrating the objective nature of divine authority. The Thunder God's justice would continue to operate through natural processes that rewarded virtue and punished wrongdoing according to cosmic laws that had governed existence since the foundation of the world. The legacy of Perkunas worship provided future generations with proven methods for maintaining harmonious relationships with natural forces while accessing divine assistance during times of crisis or opportunity. The accumulated wisdom preserved through centuries of storm observation and ritual practice offered practical guidance for agricultural planning, community organization, and spiritual development that remained relevant regardless of technological advancement or social change. The Thunder God's eternal presence assured his followers that divine protection and guidance would remain available to those who honored their obligations to cosmic order while maintaining respect for the supernatural forces that govern their existence. Thus, the mighty Perkunas continues his eternal watch over the Baltic lands, his thunder rolling across the same forests and fields that have echoed with divine voices since the dawn of time. His lightning still illuminates the darkness, his rain still nourishes the earth, and his justice still governs the moral order of the universe. The Thunder God's dominion knows no end, his power as enduring as the storms themselves, ensuring that those who honour the ancient ways will never lack divine protection and guidance. In every flash of lightning and rumble of thunder, Perkunas speaks to those who remember how to listen, his eternal voice a testament to the enduring bond between the divine and mortal realms that has sustained the Baltic peoples throughout their long and storied history.